Chapter 10-15. Fraud. Fraud. Xianyuan Wushang unconsciously wiped the pure water that he had sprayed on himself because he was too excited. He muttered to himself. After a long while, he looked at Xing Tian. Are you kidding me? That's the truth. Xing Tian's voice was low and solemn. Young master, I'm more sensitive than you in this regard. I'm sure that her current state is fraud. All the astonishment and disbelief on Xianyuan Wushang's chubby face gradually disappeared. His harmless face gradually became serious. Xing Tian did not move. The young master in front of him, who might be very funny and didn't care about his image, had a majesty that made people unable to look at him directly once he became serious. But the environment here is not right. This is even more incredible than when Big Brother defeated Zhang Shangyu. No, it's not incredible. It's completely impossible. Xing Tian lowered his head and wanted to say something but stopped. What do you want to say? Xianyuan Wushang rolled his eyes. There was a trace of light in his usually innocent eyes. There's a precedent for a similar situation. Xing Tian whispered. Who? Xianyuan Wushang raised his eyebrows. Duke guarding Duke. Xing Tian's voice was filled with awe. The corner of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched. It seemed that he wanted to curse, but after twitching for a long time, he didn't say anything in the end. The so-called Duke guarding Duke was not a person. Perhaps it was a person, but under such circumstances, the identity that Xing Tian mentioned represented a group of people. But no matter which one of those people, what right did the Song of the Full Moon have to compare with them? You, Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and slowly spat out a noun that he had just learned. Are you bullshitting me? If it exists, it makes sense. Xing Tian said in a low, muffled voice. Xianyuan Wushang stood motionless and was silent for a long time. Maybe when this is over, I should talk to sister-in-law. He whispered to himself, it's the sleeping sister-in-law. If there's anything special about the Song of the Full Moon, it's probably that she used to follow sister-in-law all year round. This is an unexpected discovery. You can mention it at the next meeting. Maybe someone will be interested in it. Xing Tian said softly. This is not a good thing. Xianyuan Wushang said expressionlessly, this is not a good thing for anyone, so there is no need to mention it. He looked at Xing Tian and said calmly, keep this a secret. Yes. Xing Tian lowered his head. Fraud, tisk, Xianyuan Wushang muttered to himself. In the end, he shook his head and sighed. What came to his mind was the glorious history of this word, which was enough to make one's blood boil. He looked at the receding night under the helicopter. This was the place he had always dreamed of, but at this time, when he saw the Plenilun him and Li Tianlan, he sincerely sighed and said, I miss home. Xing Tian looked at him silently. After a while, he said, me too. The corners of Xianyuan Wushang's eyes twitched slightly. Only then did he remember his mission. He wouldn't stay here for long and would return soon. As for Xing Tian, wow, this is so bitter, so miserable. Ahem, Xianyuan Wushang coughed and stiffly changed the topic. Now that I think about it, Duke guarding Duke's daughter is really beautiful. I haven't seen her for a long time. Xing Tian's voice was calm. Xianyuan Wushang was speechless. The helicopter flew through the night and approached Ninghu. The sound of fighting rang from a distance. This was their second stop after arriving in East Island. The two successfully met with Situ Tsangyue 2 hours ago and completely stabilized the situation. The headquarters of Wuji Palace, which was almost empty, was almost completely destroyed. The remaining forces fled. Situ Tsangyue was concentrating on dealing with the mess. Xianyuan Wushang, who had been controlling all the communications in East Island, immediately noticed the abnormality in the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School and rushed over without hesitation. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School in Ninghu was already a mess. Fighting and chaos spread rapidly. This place, which was supposed to be defenseless, had now become the biggest trap of East Island. Yagyu Tsangxuan, the leader of Jifeng sword raining school, was a disciple of Jiang Shangyu. If there were benefits, he would naturally give them to his own people and allies. Therefore, as early as a few days ago, all the 2,000 saint warriors that Jiang Shangyu borrowed from the Holy Land were placed in Jifeng sword raining school, including the commander of the 2,000 saint warriors, Gravich, who was now the new commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Holy Land. After the chaos in Snow Country, for more than 2 years, the Holy Land had done everything to cultivate a new invincible realm expert. Therefore, when Saint led the Nightmare Army to attack Jifeng sword raining school, it was tantamount to stepping directly into Jiang Shangyu's trap. On the side of Wuji Palace, the other side was retreating. On the side of Jifeng sword raining school, the fierce fighting had continued from the beginning to the present. Not only did the Nightmare Army of Emperor Dong's palace not gain the upper hand, but it was also vaguely suppressed by the Holy Disarmament Corps. The only thing that could stabilize the morale of the Nightmare Army was the battle of the invincible realm experts. The shining sword energy collided wildly with the domain. When Xianyuan Wushang arrived, the battle between Saint and Gravich had almost reached its climax. The constantly surging domain and the crisscrossing sword energy almost affected the nearby space. Even the flight of the helicopter became a little unstable. Is this the invincible realm? Xianyuan Wushang whispered to himself and glanced at Xing Tian. Xing Tian looked at Xianyuan Wushang silently, as if he was still immersed in the mood of wanting to go back. The atmosphere in the cabin was silent and awkward. Xianyuan Wushang looked at the battle on the ground that had casualties and frowned slightly. That man. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly pointed at Gravich, who was entangled with Saint. I don't like him. Xing Tian was a little confused. Don't you King want to be a PE teacher in Tiannan? Then why don't you show your skills to Emperor Dong's palace? Otherwise, you will be sent to be a security guard sooner or later. Xianyuan Wushang scolded him jokingly and kicked Xing Tian's leg. His finger was still pointing at Gravich. Make him disappear. Xing Tian, who was kicked, didn't shake at all. He thought about it seriously, nodded, and opened the door of the helicopter. The battle between the two invincible realm experts became more and more intense. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes subconsciously. His eyes fell on Gravich. This new invincible realm expert, who had been cultivated by the Holy Land at all costs for 2 years, was tall and straight, and his blonde hair was like a burning fire. Although he was at a disadvantage in the battle with Saint after the spirit coronation, his absolutely sharp spiritual willpower after the coronation made his reaction extremely fast. Now, although he was injured, he didn't show any signs of defeat. The moment Xing Tian's eyes fell on him, Gravich suddenly turned back and also locked his eyes on Xing Tian. Their eyes met in midair for a moment. Out of an instinctive reaction, Gravich's hair suddenly stood on end. The instinctive sense of danger seemed to pierce into his body in an instant, deep into his internal organs, bone marrow, and every drop of blood. Xing Tian in his sight seemed to be a huge beast that was countless times more dangerous than Saint. Danger was screaming. But in his perception, Saint's huge figure had no aura at all. His tall body bent slightly and walked out of the cabin. The wind roared, the domain raged, and the sword energy flew. He stood in midair, motionless. Without any hesitation, the domain around Gravich suddenly expanded, and the extreme eruption of power temporarily forced military counselor to retreat. Gravich turned around and ran without hesitation. Dignity, reputation, glory, status, and everything else, provided that he was alive. He didn't know why he was afraid, but the moment he saw Xing Tian, every cell in his body seemed to remind him that death was close at hand. He used all of his power to strengthen his domain. He didn't have any fighting spirit. He only thought about running for his life. The domain squeezed the space and became more and more condensed. In the shortest time, it directly solidified to the limit. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes and stretched out his hands. His aura was still calm. But as he stretched out his hands, the whole space suddenly let out an extremely harsh and sharp whistle. Xing Tian's palms were empty. In the eyes of everyone who saw this scene, the night sky seemed to be clearly deformed in Xing Tian's hands. The endless night turned into a giant bow nearly 3 meters long. He drew the bow and put the arrow on it. The night winds suddenly disappeared, and the night was suddenly chaotic. Xing Tian, who had no aura from beginning to end, stood in the air like an ordinary person. The giant bow condensed by the night was as black as ink in his hand. The dark bowstring was pulled back for a moment. He loosened his palm. The giant bow suddenly dissipated. There were no arrows in the air. But heaven and earth were completely quiet. The night was frozen, and there was no wind or snow. It was dead silent. Gravich, who had escaped hundreds of meters away, turned around in horror. He opened his mouth and shouted something. It seemed that he was begging, cursing, and cursing. What he saw was only the back of Xing Tian, who bent over and curled back into the cabin. In his sight, his domain began to break without any stagnation. It was broken in all directions. The solid domain seemed to have encountered an invisible force and was shattered into powder without resistance in an instant. It was silent. The broken domain completely swallowed up Gravich's figure. Gravich's figure disappeared. It looked like his figure was completely swallowed up by the broken domain. There was no blood, no light, and nothing. An invincible realm expert just disappeared. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School was dead silent. Boom! After the invisible arrow, there was a sudden burst of real thunder in the night sky. Lightning cut through the sky. The winter thunder rumbled. Before dawn, it began to rain in Ninghu. Xing Tian got back into the cabin and sat down in a corner. He was ordinary and had no momentum before killing people. After killing people, he was still ordinary and had no momentum. His body was too big, so he looked like a doormat when he was nestled in the cabin. Good job. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes wandered, and his voice was a little erratic. Xing Tianxia raised his head subconsciously, but he saw that his little master's eyes had moved from Beihai on the screen of the cabin to the window. The battle at the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School suddenly became fierce. With the death of Gravich, the Nightmare Army was full of momentum, and its morale rose sharply. And there was an obvious break in the rhythm of the battle of the Holy Disarmament Corps. He disappeared from this world without a sound. Gravich, a new invincible realm expert cultivated by the sanctuary, was even more miserable than Absolute, who died in Li Tianlan's hands with one punch. He came to East Island with hidden strength and died silently. From beginning to end, he could be said to be a nobody. The helicopter hovered over Jifeng Sword Raining School. The rain under the night gradually accelerated. Saint stood in the air and was silent for 2 minutes. Through the cabin, Xianyuan Wushang stared at Saint for 2 minutes without blinking. His eyes were a little excited, a little guilty, and a little grateful. Young master. Xing Tian let out a muffled cry. Yes. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and then shook his head. He seemed to know that something was wrong with his state. He rubbed his face hard and whispered, Xing Tian, do you know what the biggest sorrow of a doctor is? Xing Tian was stunned. The young master in front of him was different from him. He came here with his own mission, so he could teach sports, be a gatekeeper, be a beggar, be a security guard, or do anything. He had shown his strength tonight and could be valued by Emperor Dong's palace. If there were no accidents, he would not have a chance to do anything for a long time until he left. And the young master in front of him. His combat capability was not zero, but he was really a doctor. Maybe this doctor was more high-end than Emperor Dong's palace, but a doctor was a doctor. Xianyuan Wushang's problem seemed to have involved the meaning of his job. Xing Tian hesitated and did not speak. The biggest sorrow of a doctor is to see his comrades die slowly, but he can do nothing but watch. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Saint outside the window with a complicated expression. Many years ago, he pointed at Saint and said, I have a comrade who looks like him. Xing Tian glanced at Saint outside the window and still did not speak. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and exhaled. Ask him to come and sit down. Xianyuan Wushang said, "Prepare a pot of good tea." "Now?" Xing Tian confirmed once more. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and said, "I am a doctor. You can tell him that even if he does not participate in the underground battle, we will win. And from now on, there will be no more casualties in Emperor Dong's palace." Stillness. In front of Mount Dibbing, the battle, which could be said to be the key to breaking the stalemate in everyone's eyes, suddenly stopped. The wind and snow were still, the knife light was still, the blood was still, and the blade was still. Everything seemed to be frozen for a moment. This strange scene even made the chaotic battle on Mount Dibbing stop. All the invincible realm experts fixed their eyes on Wang Yue Haiyange and Wang Xiaoyao. The blood-stained Xianggu maintained the downward chopping posture, and the sharp blade was less than 30 centimeters away from Wang Yue Haiyange's head. Wang Yue Haiyange reached out her hand. To be exact, it was a finger. She raised her only left hand, and her slender, pale, and beautiful finger gently tapped the blade. Then everything suddenly stopped. Heaven and earth seemed to become extremely quiet at this moment. Jiang Shangyu frowned tightly. Through the distance, she silently looked at the knife in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. An indescribable feeling naturally rose in her heart. He saw Wang Yue Xiangu open her hands. Her 5 fingers pinched the blade in an extremely tough yet delicate manner. Not only was Wang Xiaoyao's blade unable to move an inch, but the entire world seemed to have been completely frozen. Moraid's face was a little pale. He thought of the fight with the master of Samsara Palace in Snow Country. As Jiang Shangyu's true confidant, after Mormon's Sword of Eternity ended, Moraid naturally confirmed that it was Wang Yue Haiyange who had fought with him. At that time, Wang Yue Haiyange was clearly not his opponent. But now, he gritted his teeth fiercely. In his sight, Wang Yue Haiyange stretched out her fist. Her clenched fist was delicate and small, but extremely domineering. It was obviously a body of flesh and blood, but the fist hit the blade hard, and then everything froze there. Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Tsangxuan looked at each other. These two brothers, who were competitors and had deep personal grudges against each other, yet were always able to maintain a tacit understanding at crucial moments, looked at each other. In their line of sight, Moon-Gazing Cord's finger lightly tapped the edge of the blade, and then the world seemed to completely freeze. Wang Xiaoyao did not move. He maintained the downward chopping motion, stiff there. In his sight, Wang Yue Haiyange stood up and took a small step back. It was just a small step, but the surrounding environment suddenly changed. Wang Xiaoyao found that he could no longer lock on to Wang Yue Haiyange's figure. An invisible resistance firmly blocked the blade in his hand. There was no way for his knife to move down even 1 centimeter. Chaos, distortion, different perspectives, different pictures, but the same result. In the air above Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan, who had been ready to attack with all his strength, stopped and looked at Wang Xiaoyao and flaming fire in the distance. The sword intent in his eyes flowed, and the 13th flight shook gently. Perhaps the picture in his eyes was the clearest and most realistic. The most realistic picture was that flaming fire did not move. She did not stretch out her fingers, clench her fists, or get up. She just slowly got up and moved a step to the left, shaking. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Wang Yue Haiyange kept breathing deeply, and an extremely horrible aura surged wildly in her body. Her eyes were blood red in an instant. She was the strongest super master of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai's right-hand woman, and the master of Samsara Palace. She was now the Dark Queen of the Dark Knights. Even if she was injured, she was still a big shot standing at the top of the Dark World. She had come here for the sake of their past friendship and for the future. She had come here to help, not to be a burden. Wang Yue Haiyange did not mind that one of her arms was cut off. What she could not accept most was that she was used as a bargaining chip to threaten Li Tianlan. If such a thing happened, she might as well not come. She came to help. During the brief confrontation between Wang Xiaoyao and Li Tianlan, this was the only thought in Wang Yue Haiyange's mind. Just like how Li Tianlan could enter Jiang Shangyu's shadow without knowing why. Wang Yue Haiyan herself could not tell what state she was in now. The only thing she could do was to overdraft her potential and body at all costs in that instant. This kind of extreme overdraft was a step further than an all-out explosion. It was almost as if she was burning herself without caring about the consequences, so that her scarred body could withstand the power of her peak or even surpass it. She did not expect that when she completely overdrew herself, it would form such a situation. It felt like space was divided into countless mirrors, and every subtle movement of hers was reflected by pieces of mirror-like space with extensibility. Space was torn apart little by little, and countless spaces were like countless mirrors. In the wind and snow, under the blade, Wang Yue Haiyan felt like she was standing in a room full of mirrors. Her movement of getting up continued to extend in the mirror, turning into a gesture of reaching out and clenching a fist. The movement of raising her hand turned into an outstretched finger. She stood up, but in the mirror, she moved to the left and right. All this was vague and unreal in Wang Yue Haiyan's perception. For a short moment, she could not figure out whether space was distorted and divided or her spirit was distorted and divided. The erupting sword energy kept rushing out of her body. Everything around her was completely distorted. The most illusory was distorted into reality, and the most real her was distorted into an illusion. She was here, but what everyone saw in their consciousness was all an illusion. The whole process was very simple in Wang Yue Haiyan's eyes. The moment Wang Xiaoyao's blade came down, he suddenly paused. At that time, he seemed to have seen something. Song of the Full Moon used that moment to dodge the blade and stand up. Space was distorted and divided. Many things happened in that moment, but in fact, nothing happened. It was just a simple dodge. The pale Wang Yue Haiyan stood up straight. Her aura was getting stronger and stronger. Overdrawing her body to the limit would make her injuries worse, but at this time, it also gave her power beyond her peak. It was a completely unintentional transformation. The outburst in the desperate situation greatly increased the burden on her body, but the twisted sword intent split the space. In a short period of time, it affected everyone in a way that seemed both coincidental and inevitable that they could not come into contact with. Wang Yue Haiyan dodged the blade and stood up. Her body began to recover. Or, she was overdrawing. She kept overdrawing. The sword energy was surging in her body like a mighty torrent. At this moment, Flaming Fire's swordsmanship was real, but she temporarily stood at the peak of the invincible realm. The will that was absolutely concentrated in essence, qi, and spirit was not so much supporting her body. It was better to say that Wang Yue Haiyan deceived her body and every organ in her body. She overdrew her body so that every organ, every joint, every drop of blood, and every cell in her body thought that she was in her peak state. So her body was overdrawn, and her sword energy recovered. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. She confused the enemy in the shortest time. She also deceived herself in the shortest time. Only her spirit was still calm and rational. It was hard for Wang Yue Haiyan to explain and figure out everything for the time being. If she used the most authoritative words to explain it, it was deception. For Xianyuan Wushang, it was very important. For Wang Yue Haiyan, she just didn't want to be a burden. Your opponent, the endless surging aura broke through the wind and snow and rushed to the sky. Wang Yue Haiyan's cold voice rang out. It's me. The recovering sword energy broke through to a new peak at an incredible speed in an instant. Frozen, disordered, and still, everything returned to normal in an instant. The blade of Qinggu, the famous saber, trembled slightly, and the downward slash turned into a horizontal sweep. The moment he locked onto Wang Yue Haiyan's position again, Wang Xiaoyao didn't hesitate and used all his strength to break out completely. He didn't figure out what had just happened, but he didn't like any variables. He hadn't been at the peak of the invincible realm for a long time, less than half a year. This was originally his biggest trump card, and it directly crushed Wang Yue Haiyan at the beginning of the battle. If it hadn't been for the accident just now, the final battle in Beihai might have been over by now, and Li Tianlan would have died. A battle at this level needed an opportunity. The so-called victory or defeat, or even life and death, was often decided in an instant. Li Tianlan wanted to save Wang Yuehayange, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Wang Xiaoyao. These three people could almost represent the top combat strength in the dark world today. They were very likely to be able to injure or even kill Li Tianlan in an instant. This shouldn't have been an accident. But the accident happened just like that. Wang Yuehayange actually struggled to find a way out in a desperate situation. He wasn't very upset or frustrated, but at this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's killing intent really reached an unprecedented peak. He wanted to do something for Beihai, and this was the closest he had ever been to success. Wang Yuehayange couldn't stop him, and no one could stop him. He was the only one who could make Beihai better. The dazzling broadsword light suddenly drew a natural arc. Wang Xiaoyao's figure shuttled quickly. With just a slight flash, he and the broadsword light had arrived in front of Wang Yuehayange at the same time. The dazzling brilliance flashed. Wang Yuehayange, who only had his left hand left, but his aura was stronger than before. He held cicada cry and stabbed forward. A stream of sword energy with endless sharpness suddenly collided with the broadsword light. There was no crushing and suppression. It was a completely evenly matched scene. The crazy friction between the sword light and the broadsword light brought about a loud noise that almost tore the space apart. The two figures quickly drew closer. No one retreated. They pulled out their broadswords and pulled out their swords. The fierce collision of the broadsword and the sword sounded in an instant. The changes of the 24 moves of sword in Wang Yuehayange seemed to have reached the extreme. In the sky and on the ground, the sword light flew. The vast and endless sword energy condensed into beams of light one after another, constantly flashing in the air. However, Wang Xiaoyao, whose eyes had become completely gloomy and indifferent, suddenly calmed down a lot. His figure was attacking. Attack, attack, attack. The two of them maintained the shortest distance between each other. The sword and the sword collided countless times. The huge blade in Wang Xiaoyao's hand was like a delicate dagger at this time, sticking close to Wang Yue and him's as he waved them around. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao didn't have any extra movements. The originally extremely violent and arrogant broadsword technique suddenly went to another extreme. His movements became extremely concise, and the absolute conciseness brought about incredible smoothness. Close to Wang Yuehayange, his attacks were like a storm. Although he couldn't completely crush Wang Yuehayange, as time went by, Wang Xiaoyao once again mastered the attack rhythm. On Mount Dibbing, Wang Xingxiao's tense body slightly relaxed for a moment. He frowned and said, "What just happened?" Li Tianlan shook his head silently. In the situation just now, except for Wang Yuehayange, perhaps only Li Tianlan could see clearly what was going on. He could clearly see every movement of Wang Yuehayange, and also the mirror-like space around Wang Yuehayange. His perception seemed to be focused on the mirror around Wang Yuehayange for a few seconds, but his eyes could clearly see the most real state of Wang Yuehayange. He didn't know what was going on either. It was as if everyone's perception had been deceived in that instant, but it wasn't the kind of hypnotic power that came from the mind. It was more like an interesting use of power. Fire flaming has broken through? Wang Xingxiao looked at Wang Yuehayange and asked strangely. "It's temporary." Li Tianlan said lightly, "It's still a little bit away from a real breakthrough, a little bit." The battle in his sight was still going on. Wang Xiaoyao's movements became more and more concise and smooth. In the shining light, he strode forward, ignoring everything. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he shook his head subconsciously. Flaming fire now temporarily had the strength of the peak of the invincible realm, but it didn't mean that she could beat Wang Xiaoyao. The 24 moves of sword was the supreme sword technique of the dark world, as famous as the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. In terms of inheritance, the 24 moves of sword was undoubtedly better than Wang Xiaoyao, who followed the path of the predecessors and finally perfected his martial arts bit by bit. But Flaming Fire's most fatal flaw at this time was her injury. The injury that she had suppressed before she came here slightly affected her state. As for the external injury, after losing the right arm that she was most used to using the sword, Wang Yuehian's movements were always very strange. Compared to usual, her movements were a little more complicated. Wang Xiaoyao's martial arts were flawed. At the very least, Li Tianlan could see the occasional flaw in Wang Xiaoyao's simple, smooth, and almost perfect movements. Such a flaw could be tested when Song of the Full Moon entered the peak of the invincible realm and was in good condition. But now, Wang Yuehian might be able to see it. But her movement speed couldn't keep up with her eyesight. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, and then sighed softly. He didn't expect that the situation would become so passive. Qiushui, Tongtian, Kanglan, Empress, and Lapis Lazuli. The situation in these cities was not unexpected. The power of the joint forces was too strong. In the early stage of the final battle in Beihai, Beihai was destined to be at a huge disadvantage. Throughout the night, the biggest surprise was the moment when the weapons in Mount Dibing were blocked. Wang Xiaoyao didn't expect that Wu Qingwu would betray Mount Dibing. No one could expect it. When the weapons in Mount Dibing couldn't be used, they lost their biggest trump card. Mount Dibing, which had no high-end combat power, was a toothless tiger. When all kinds of weapons were blocked, it became a sick cat in an instant. Wang Xingxiao put his hope on the weapon system in Mount Dibing and Li Tianlan's own powerful combat power. Now that the former trump card had lost its effect, it meant that Li Tianlan had to bear more pressure. This was the first variable. Wang Xiaoyao's hidden strength was the second variable. The destructive power of a peak of the invincible realm expert couldn't be described too much, especially when they lost the advantage of firepower. Their top combat power was at an absolute disadvantage, and almost all the pressure was on Li Tianlan. He was not afraid of Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, or Wang Xiaoyao. He was not afraid of anyone. But when everyone stood on the opposite side of him, so what? Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The sword formation of the 13-story building, which had been rotating around him, suddenly became clear. All eyes were focused on him at the same time, including Wang Xiaoyao's will. Everyone could regard Wang Yuehian as the key to breaking the situation, but now the main reason for the deadlock was Li Tianlan. Nothing was more important than Li Tianlan's every move now. If I leave Mount Dibing now, what do you think will happen? Li Tianlan looked at the sword formation rotating around him and suddenly asked. Wang Xiaoyao was stunned. He said calmly, Beihai will lose in the final battle, East Island will take half of Beihai, I will die here, second uncle will become the new patriarch, and Wang Yuehian will also die. Emperor Dong's palace will turn against the Dark Knights, and there will be a deadly feud between them and the joint forces. Your power in East Island may be withdrawn, but without the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace will lose a natural barrier, and the whole dark world will be your enemy. At the same time, you will be pressured by Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State will also find that they have other choices besides Emperor Dong's palace, such as Jiang Shangyu, who is relatively easier to control, and second uncle. It sounds really miserable. Li Tianlan smiled. Let's not talk about this. Wang Xingxiao looked at Li Tianlan. Now that you are standing here, do you think Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu are really willing to let you go with such a good opportunity? The Emperor Dong's palace is in a good situation now. The Flourishing Age Fund's participation has made the Emperor Dong's palace a superforce. If you die here, not only will they lose a fatal threat in the future, but they will also be able to carve up the huge profits in the Emperor Dong's palace. With you here, who would be willing to let you leave? I can't leave. Li Tianlan said calmly, it's not that I can't leave. You don't seem to be optimistic about the result of the final battle. Wang Xingxiao narrowed his eyes and said slowly. To be exact, it's my distrust of you. I know what you are waiting for, and you know what I am worried about. This is your Mount Dibing, and I can do my best. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and continued, where is Wuyo? Wang Xingxiao suddenly fell silent. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the sword formation rotating around him without saying a word. He is not in Mount Dibing now. At this point, I don't need to lie to you. If you lose this final battle, you will be miserable, but Beihai will be more miserable. If he is here, I can't hide to deal with you. Compared with you, these people in front of you are the real enemies that can't coexist. Where is Wuyo? Li Tianlan asked again. I only know that he is in Beihai. Wang Xingxiao said calmly. Uncle Lin told me that Wuyo can't leave Mount Dibbing and Worry-Free Villa. Li Tianlan frowned. I don't know about Wuyo, but he can leave temporarily. Because of some special circumstances, he has to leave. Wang Xingxiao looked at the sword formation around Li Tianlan and said calmly, because of you, or Wuqing, he feels threatened. So? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. So before Wuqing's energy is reduced to a certain level, I don't know where he is. Wang Xingxiao said. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at Wang Xingxiao quietly. Wang Xingxiao was also looking at him. There was no avoidance in his eyes at all. Li Tianlan didn't know whether what he said was true or not. But the current situation was really not optimistic. Li Tianlan had to do something. The 13th floor became clearer and clearer around him. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he nodded. In that case, he pointed his finger gently. The infinite sword light drowned the Tianguang sword in an instant. The shining sword light lit up on Mount Dibbing, where the wind and snow were flying. In the endless light and shadow, Li Tianlan's voice was calm and indifferent. Then let's do as it wishes, and as you wish. Wuqing's energy was slowly but steadily decreasing. Another Li Tianlan appeared on Mount Dibbing. It was the Li Tianlan who was materialized by the Tianguang sword carrying Li Tianlan's sword intent. The two identical figures seemed to look at each other for a moment. Tianguang turned around and rushed to Jinghong in the war. It was at this moment. East Island, Ninghu. Xing Tian's huge and thick fingers loosened the bowstring that was as dark as night. At the same time, Li Tianlan looked up. It rained in East Island and snowed in Beihai. The night was still dark. Li Tianlan looked up at the night sky. Without his control, the sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly started to spin wildly. Crack. Crack, countless famous swords around Li Tianlan's body instantly combined into Wuqing. Wuqing turned into a black cloak and draped over Li Tianlan. The cloak fluttered unscrupulously in the cold wind and snow. Countless complex and mysterious golden lines flashed with a faint golden light at the same time. The cloak took Li Tianlan's figure to the sky quickly, getting higher and higher. In a flash, he had become a small black dot. Li Tianlan did not react at all from beginning to end. He just raised his head and looked at the pitch-black sky. The night was dead silent. There were no stars or clouds. There was only wind and snow. Li Tianlan's eyes were solemn and blank. He was now the strongest swordsman standing at the peak of the dark world. In the field of sword, when Wang Tianzong did not show up, he was the strongest. But at this moment, he stood high in the sky and looked at the night sky above with a blank face. Vaguely, he seemed to have sensed an incredibly subtle yet absolutely vast aura. That feeling, it seemed, could be, maybe, probably, it was a streak of sword energy. This volume is about to end. After it ends, there should be a separate chapter to talk about why this volume is so stupid. Well, about this fat man and Xing Tian. Chapter 10-16. Li Tianlan was rising, and Tianguang's sword was falling. Except for Li Tianlan and Wuqing, it seemed that no one or anything could feel that incomparably faint aura. It was far away. That aura was so indifferent, as if separated by an unimaginable distance. It appeared and disappeared in a flash. With Li Tianlan's current strength, he was not even sure if it was a sword energy. Li Tianlan, condensed by Tianguang's sword, had rushed into the battle of Mount Dibbing at the moment when his real body rose. The surging power from all directions tore the surrounding space wildly. Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurumi's figures were intertwined. The light of the sword and the saber reflected each other, and the sharp killing intent immediately shrouded Tianguang's sword. Everything on the battlefield seemed to be very normal. Just when Wang Xiaoyao was attracted by Li Tianlan, Mochizuki Song, who gradually fell into a passive position, suddenly broke out with all her strength. She did have the strength of the peak of the invincible realm now. But it was undeniable that because of her injury, she was no longer a match for Wang Xiaoyao. She didn't want to be a burden, let alone a bargaining chip in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. She had to seize all the opportunities that she could or could only seize. The cicada's cry trembled violently, and the sword light that was about to be suppressed by the saber light completely lit up. Mochizuki Song, who only had one arm left, strode forward and directly rushed to Wang Xiaoyao. The ninth blade's dusk. The solid sword energy tore the surrounding saber light, and Mochizuki Song's figure became more determined than ever. The cicada sword kept buzzing. The moment the saber light was suppressed for a short time, Mochizuki Song's sword intent suddenly changed. The 11th blade alluring. Alluring a city with one sword. All the saber light between heaven and earth shrank in an instant and condensed on the tip of the cicada's sword. Mochizuki Sword Song seemed to be driven by the cicada's sword. Like a phantom, he appeared beside Wang Xiaoyao in an instant. Clang! Wang Xiaoyao suddenly came to his senses and subconsciously raised the blade in his hand. The tip of the sword, which was shining with a cicada's cry, collided with the huge blade. Mochizuki Song's palm turned slightly, and the long sword with infinite sword energy stabbed forward for a moment, directly cutting a deep wound on Wang Xiaoyao's face. Not far away, Mount Dibbing was completely boiling. Wang Xiaoyao's pupils contracted, and his essence, qi, and spirit were completely condensed. Very annoying. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly said, "You are very annoying, so I can only send you to hell first." None. The dark night suddenly shook. A clear shattering sound rang out without warning. Wang Xiaoyao, whose body was tense, waved the blade without any hesitation. Everything around him was shattering. That was a true shattering. The huge blade drew a flawless circle in the night, and the space within 100 meters turned into nothingness in the blink of an eye. The snow and wind evaporated. The night sky was completely shattered. Absolute darkness and silence enveloped Mochizuki Song in an instant. Wang Xiaoyao's body directly retreated a distance of hundreds of meters under the drive of this knife, just standing on the edge of the broken space. His entire body was glowing, and the saber radiance condensed from the immense power became unprecedentedly dazzling. Behind the horizon was the bright moon. Without any hesitation, Wang Xiaoyao stood at the edge of the shattered space and abruptly threw Qinggu out. In the pure darkness, the constantly blossoming saber light suddenly turned into an incomparably pure golden color. Countless golden rays of light refracted in the silent and broken domain. The huge blade of Qinggu flew out of his hand. Every time the blade rotated in the air, it brought a large piece of golden saber radiance. The refracted saber radiance turned into wisps of light, which twisted and turned into pieces of saber shadows. Densely packed. Almost in the blink of an eye, countless golden rays turned into thousands of saber blades. The saber blades rotated and rushed to Mochizuki Song one by one. At the moment when Mochizuki Song, whose body was in the shattered space, stabilized, the saber shadows all over the sky had already arrived in front of her. Mochizuki Song's figure began to rotate rapidly. The 8th blade, burning sky. The sword energy was like fire. A halo of sword energy of nearly 20 meters suddenly appeared around Mochizuki Song. Her body rotated faster and faster, and the scope of the halo of sword energy became larger and larger. The dense sword energy intertwined layer by layer. The huge halo collided with the golden saber shadows all over the sky. The halo spread. The countless saber shadows turned solid the moment they came into contact with the halo. A large number of saber shadows were swept away. Wang Xiaoyao stood there, motionless. His body became the center of the saber shadows all over the sky. The saber shadows that were swept away spun back to him, and then rushed to the halo again. The golden saber radiance lit up the whole night sky. Wang Xiaoyao's figure stood in the center of the golden light, incomparably gorgeous and majestic. The halo around Mochizuki's song was getting larger and larger. And the golden saber's shadows were getting more and more fast. The vast and endless golden saber seemed to cover the whole night sky, constantly wearing down the sword energy around Mochizuki's song. The scope of the sword energy was getting larger and larger, but the degree of condensation of the sword energy was constantly decreasing. Wang Xiaoyao raised his palm with no expression. The huge Qinggu whistled back to his hand. Wang Xiaoyao held the blade, and he didn't want to waste any time. He suddenly swung his palm. The golden saber's shadows that covered the whole world became completely frenzied. The saber lights all over the sky rushed to Mochizuki's song like crazy. They were swept away, and then they rushed back at a faster speed. Mochizuki's song's rotating figure became more and more strenuous, and the halo of sword energy around her began to dim. He lost. The result was obvious. She cheated her body so that she temporarily had the power of the peak of the invincible realm. She didn't want to be a burden. But even so, she still lost. Mochizuki's song's aura began to decline. The golden saber lights all over the sky in front of her were like a torrent, vast and mighty, occupying all her vision. Mochizuki's song, who had been calm, took a deep breath. Her voice suddenly sounded in the light of the entanglement of the saber and the sword. "I can lose," she said blandly, but her body stopped spinning. The halo of sword energy around her began to be squeezed by countless saber shadows in an instant. The halo became smaller and thinner. Mochizuki's song looked as usual. She held Cicada Cry with her remaining arm and put it upright in front of her. She raised the sword to her eyebrows. Mochizuki's song's aura suddenly became very calm. It was like the calm before the storm. Her voice slowly sounded, "You can't win either." The boundless golden saber shadows completely drowned her. Mochizuki's song closed her eyes. Her expression became soft and serene, with a little nostalgia. The scenes of the past kept flashing in her mind. Her aura suddenly began to change. It was as if Wang Yuxian's song had suddenly become another person. 24 Moves of Sword 15th Blade Samsara. Chapter 10:17. As the only inheritance of the Li family's swordsmanship, in the Dark World, the 24 moves of sword had always been regarded as the top unique skill of swordsmanship in the Dark World, keeping pace with the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. In the past hundreds of years, because of the Li family's responsibilities, generation after generation of war gods of the Li family stood on the cusp of the Dark World. Compared with the calm and invincible Wang family of Beihai, the Li family was more powerful. Therefore, the 24 moves of sword was even more famous than the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation. The Dark World was so familiar with the 24 moves of sword. After so many years, almost anyone with a little bit of knowledge could recognize the 24 moves of sword and the 24 unique skills. A few of them had even been lost to the outside world and supported many large-scale forces. However, in the hundreds of years since the Lin clan came to the Li family, very few people could really appreciate the 24 moves of sword. The map of God of War represented the Li family's martial arts for hundreds of years. They were the Balance Manual, the Peak Manual, and the Invincible Manual. The first two were relatively stable, while the latter was almost a new transformation of the Balance Manual and the Peak Manual. Li Honghe practiced the Balance Manual. Even someone as arrogant as Li Guangtu had only practiced the Pinnacle Scripture at the beginning. His Longevity Seal and Immortal Seal still had a lot of traces of the Pinnacle Scripture. After breaking and building, although he had also come into contact with the Invincible Scripture, the Pinnacle Scripture was his foundation. The Li family had 9 generations of war gods. Including Li Tianlan, it was the 10th generation. Among the 10 generations, only Li Tianlan practiced the Invincible Manual. He destroyed his body in the most extreme way, infinitely overdrew his body's potential, and took the fastest way to ensure the strongest strength. Whether it was Dongqing Huangtu in the memory or Li Tianlan now, their paths had not changed. At the most difficult time, they both chose the Invincible Manual. So for now, in the past hundreds of years, excluding the ancestors of the Lin clan, only Li Tianlan could really let people see the full appearance of the 24 moves of sword, and only he could let people see the strongest state of the 24 moves of sword. Dongxing Huangtu gave the invincible manual to Gu Xianyan, and Gu Xianyan taught the invincible manual to Flaming Fire in this era. Both of them had some martial arts foundation, so the invincible manual they practiced was undoubtedly not very pure. But with the foundation of the invincible manual, even if it was not pure, their 24 moves of sword was still the 24 moves of sword of invincible manual. What was the most powerful 24 moves of sword? It was to use the most special move in the 24 moves of swordsmanship to exert the most abundant and perfect sword energy. The 24 moves of sword were not perfect. For example, the broken reincarnation, which was claimed to specially restrain the Wang family of Beihai. For example, eternal shattering, who possessed sword intent but was unable to completely control sword qi. For example, the extremely sharp sword qi but insufficient sword intent, the sky breaker. 3 of the 4 absolute swords of the Li clan's 24 moves of sword were incomplete. Only one move, be it the sword qi or the sword intent, could be said to be perfect and flawless. It was the true ultimate sword. 21st Blade, Shatter of Land. This was the only move of the 4 supreme swords that was completely perfect. It was also the ultimate sword that could only be unleashed by practicing the invincible manual. The 15th blade, Samsara, was the most special move in the 24 moves of sword. In the 24 moves of sword, the other 23 moves were mainly for killing. Their sword intent and sword qi could be ever-changing, but their core concept remained the same. They were all focused on killing. Only the 15th blade had the core idea of borrowing, or a kind of replication in martial arts. This was the most demanding move in the 24 moves of sword. It required the perfect integration of sword energy and willpower to replicate a move that could not be exerted in one's extreme state. It was beyond the peak. One sword reincarnation, extreme sublimation. In Li Tianlan's understanding, it was to use this move to reincarnate an extremely illusory dreamland, temporarily turning everything including oneself into nothingness. In the short moment of reincarnation, the person who chose to be reincarnated was the only real one. The moment the reincarnation sword was drawn, the most real sword energy appeared from the most nothingness. This was also an important basis for supporting Li Tianlan's flawless swordsmanship. After reincarnation, Shatter of Land. This was the strongest 24 moves of sword at present. Mochizuki Song and Li Tianlan did not have much contact, and she did not need to reincarnate Li Tianlan's sword intent. So when the golden saber shadows completely submerged her body, Mochizuki Song's figure suddenly turned into nothingness. An extremely quiet and deadly aura suddenly surged out from the golden saber shadows all over the sky. It was like a dream, real and fake. Flaming Fire's figure disappeared. But the constantly fluctuating aura became stronger and stronger. In a flash, it had become a hidden sword energy. The space was broken and reorganized. A figure appeared in everyone's sight. In the golden light and shadows all over the sky, the bloated figure, which seemed real and illusory, stood quietly, dressed in black and motionless. No one could see her face. Countless golden saber shadows spun wildly around her body and chopped. She was so quiet, from the inside to the outside, there was nothing but silence. Wang Xiaoyao's heart suddenly sank. He did not know the specific reason, but a very violent and obvious uneasiness suddenly rose from his heart. Turning the blade of Millennium Blade, Wang Xiaoyao did not hesitate to open his hands. Thousands of dense golden saber shadows began to retreat at the same time. Countless saber shadows were neatly arranged, turning into a dazzling light curtain. The light curtain gathered toward Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao's hands were put together. He held Millennium Blade in his hand. A purer golden light burst out from the blade of Millennium Blade and continued to extend in the night. In an instant, a huge and heavy golden saber shadow began to take shape in his hand. The golden saber shadows all over the sky kept flying and gathered in his hand. The shadow of the golden giant saber in his hand expanded wildly, and in the blink of an eye, it had expanded to hundreds of meters. Straightforward, decisive, and ruthless. Wang Xiaoyao raised his palm, and the golden giant saber, which was hundreds of meters long, slashed at Mochizuki and Song without any reservation. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao really did his best, without any reservation. His strongest martial arts was the saber, and his strongest unique skill was also the saber. Tianyef Bright Moon. These two unique skills could be said to be the essence of his life's research. After successfully entering the peak of the invincible realm half a year ago, Wang Xiaoyao thought about it day and night, and finally combined these two unique skills and became his strongest trump card. Wang Xiaoyao named this move Saber. Pure Saber. Xiao Chen pushed his strength to the limit. Every strand of saber light was the peak of his strength in his life. In an instant, the whole night seemed to be receding. The golden saber shadow, which was hundreds of meters long, occupied everything and became the most dazzling color in the two battlefields on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain. Blood gushed out of Wang Xiaoyao's mouth. His face suddenly became as pale as a sheet of paper as he swung his saber. A large amount of blood gushed out of almost all parts of his body, and it looked extremely tragic. This was almost a move beyond his control. This was the price of extreme overdraft of his body. Before the saber light hurt anyone, his internal organs had been seriously injured by the power he exerted. The golden saber, which was hundreds of meters long, shone in the air and chopped down. The chaotic night sky was split into two halves visible to the naked eye. In the boundless silence and chaos, Mochizuki and Song raised her head. Her eyes were numb and gray. She was indeed no match for Wang Xiaoyao. Judging from Wang Xiaoyao's real strength, Mochizuki and Song believed that even if she really broke through to the peak of the invincible realm, her chance of winning against him was less than 40%. At the age of 38, he was at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Xiaoyao's talent was indeed not much worse than Wang Tianzong's. She couldn't block that move of the bright moon, nor could she block the current move of the saber. If she couldn't block it, she couldn't block it. There was nothing to hide from the truth. But what could she do? She couldn't block this move. Wang Xiaoyao would certainly not be able to block her next move. She could also let that damn man see that more than 2 years ago, there was also a person in Mormons. Just like her today, he opened up the prosperous dynasty that belonged to him with one sword move. Mochizuki and Song closed their eyes. The sword energy became more and more illusory. In a trance, in everyone's sight, the bloated figure in the black cloak began to fall from the sky without warning. The blade was on the ground. Her body continued to fall, and her speed became faster and faster. The surging sword chi followed her as she fell, drawing a clear mark in the night. The saber light suppressed the clear sword intent and chopped straight down. Under the night, the figure of flaming fire seemed to have completely become another person in everyone's sight. Master of Samsara Palace. Yagyu Kurasumi suddenly shouted. The moment he spoke, there was a pause in the battle of Mount Dibbing, whether it was graceful bird or heavenly light. Li Tianlan stood high in the sky. The incomparably vast sword energy had disappeared. He lowered his head and looked at the falling figure. His eyes were a little dazed. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace suddenly became real in the process of falling. She held Cicada Cry's left hand and raised it. Above the sky, there was a lot of colors. Night, flying snow, golden saber. A colorful light suddenly appeared on the brightly colored battlefield. Every ray of light was extremely clear and dazzling. The light was like a sword, rushing to the falling golden saber in the air. Mochizuki and Song closed her eyes, and her expression was extremely calm. The extremely powerful aura continued to rise in her body like the last radiance of the setting sun. Once again, it surpassed the peak of the invincible realm and rose all the way. One sword of samsara, extreme sublimation. Before anyone could react, the aura of Mochizuki and Song suddenly approached the peak of the invincible realm. After samsara, it was the shattering of land. Mochizuki and Song were not familiar with Li Tianlan, but she had been with Qin Weibai for many years. So in this sword move, she reincarnated the state of the Master of Samsara Palace. The strongest state of the Master of Samsara Palace. In most people's minds, everyone knew when the Master of Samsara Palace, who had died in Mormons more than 2 years ago, was at her strongest. That was before she died. The light of the eternal sword was too dazzling. So at this time in the dark world, except for Wang Tianzong, probably no one knew that the power that the Master of Samsara Palace used to control Ruthless and let him break out with all his strength was the shattering of land after Samsara. The 15th blade, Samsara. At this moment, the Master of Samsara Palace more than 2 years ago was the only choice of Mochizuki and Song. She could not completely copy the original Eternal Sword. She was not strong enough, and neither was her weapon. She could copy it. It was just the starting move of the Eternal Sword. But it was enough to deal with Wang Xiaoyao. Mochizuki and Song held Cicada Cry tightly in her hand. The sword energy was still surging and slowly changing. The golden saber that kept chopping down in the air became more and more violent. The golden saber light smashed wisps of 5-colored sword energy one after another. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were completely red. High in the sky, Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly. His heartbeat began to quicken, and his body gradually tightened. As if feeling his will, the cloak that Ruthless turned into a sword formation again. More than a dozen divine weapons slowly rotated around him. In the other direction of Mount Dibbing, the space in the air was slightly distorted. Silently, Jiang Shangyu walked out of the distorted space and looked at the direction of Wang Xiaoyao seriously and solemnly. As an expert who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, he naturally knew what this saber and sword meant. Wang Xiaoyao broke out with all his strength. At this time, Mochizuki and Song almost ignored life and death. Mochizuki and Song could not block this saber. Wang Xiaoyao also couldn't block this sword. If the light of the saber and sword completely attacked each other, then this would be a fierce battle with no winner. Wang Xiaoyao might be stronger than Mochizuki and Song. But everything was meaningless. This was destined to end in mutual destruction. The sword energy and the saber light rubbed wildly in the air. On the battlefield of Mochizuki and Wang Xiaoyao, the area within 1,000 meters was completely covered by all kinds of light. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. His body stretched out little by little, and his eyes became extremely dignified. He had no friendship with Wang Xiaoyao. The two sides were just cooperating. From the beginning to the end, they were temporarily driven by interests. Yes, temporarily. Both sides knew very well what was going on, and they also knew the direction of their relationship after this cooperation. If they won the final battle of Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao would become the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Qinglei of Zhongzhou State would also clear all the obstacles before the election and completely establish his position as the crown prince. Wang Xiaoyao and the allied forces were also destined to go their separate ways. East Island would be busy absorbing the territory in the south of Beihai. Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace would also become antagonistic again after there was no outside pressure. Even if they wouldn't fight to the death, because of the distribution of interests, there were bound to be countless frictions. The dark world inside East Island would definitely be constantly turbulent, and there was no possibility of it calming down in the near future. And more aid would also return to the European continent, completely cutting off the relationship between Knights Templars and the Holy Land, and helping Dalos stabilize its position and compete for the dominance of the Dark World in the European continent. Shadow Throne, Dark Knights, the Holy Land, Rothschild. Wild, it would also be very lively. As for Jiang Shangyu, as a deal with the Jiang family of South America, he would also go to America with Jiang Guochu to help the Jiang family of South America stabilize the throne of the Dark World in America. If the Lin clan had different opinions in the process, Jiang Shangyu would have to fight with Lin Fengting. And the Purgatory of Heaven capital would be busy devouring everything left by Emperor Dong's palace. Li Guangtu was not a good person. On the contrary, he was an extremely overbearing and paranoid person. After devouring Emperor Dong's palace, he would definitely want to take East Island back. At that time, it would also cause frictions. As for Wang Xiaoyao, after he became the patriarch of Beihai, he wouldn't do anything to the Allied forces in the short term. But it didn't mean that he would never do anything to the Allied forces. It would take 2 or 3 years to rectify the internal affairs of Beihai and regain its footing. When Li Huaqing completely retired and Wang Qinglei became the president of Zhongzhou state, the Wang family of Beihai would probably be the first to deal with the Allied forces. He wanted to destroy Jiang Shangyu and take back everything that Beihai had lost today. For hundreds of years, Beihai had never been in the habit of being a dog. Naturally, Wang Xiaoyao wouldn't either. If Wang Xiaoyao was lucky enough, with his martial arts talent, he could even break through the limit of the peak of the invincible realm in 5 or 6 years and become the so-called half-step heavenly son beyond the peak of the invincible realm. At that time, even if Wang Tianzong didn't come out, Beihai would make up for the last shortcoming of the cutting-edge combat capability. With the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Qinglei's status in the future, the Wang family of Beihai would still be a superclass superpower in the dark world, at least much more difficult to deal with than it was now. In this way, the situation after winning the final battle was already very obvious. Wang Xiaoyao was destined to part ways with them and go against them. Even the purgatory of heaven capital might also become enemies after this cooperation. The 3 parties might be able to live in peace in the short term, because each had its own problems that had to be dealt with. But when these problems were almost dealt with, the dynasty that Jiang Shangyu yearned for might not be able to take shape. Even if it took shape, he would have to face new challenges from Wang Xiaoyao and the purgatory of heaven capital. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu liked to see the fighting style of Mungeizer Xuanga and Wang Xiaoyao perishing together. He would not save Wang Xiaoyao, and it was impossible for him to do so. If Wang Xiaoyao died here, it would be a happy ending for everyone. It was not their fault. It was Wang Xiaoyao's fault. This situation was undoubtedly the best. But, Jiang Shangyu subconsciously raised his head and glanced at the sky. Li Tianlan's figure flew so high that it had merged with the night. Even Jiang Shangyu did not see Li Tianlan's figure. No one cared about Wang Xiaoyao's life or death. What about Mungeizer Xuanga's life or death? If Li Tianlan made a move, seriously injured Li Tianlan, killed Wang Xiaoyao, killed Mungeizer Xuanga, and killed Wang Xingxiao, would the final battle in Beihai come to an end? Jiang Shangyu believed that Li Tianlan could also see this possibility. But there were many things that could not be avoided just because they could see the ending. He did not save Wang Xiaoyao, but he was ready to make a move with all his strength when Li Tianlan saved Mungeizer Xuanga. The only pity was that he still did not know where Li Guangtu was. The only thing he could be sure of was that Li Guangtu should be nearby now. He had no choice. When Jiang Shangyu made a move, he would definitely cooperate fully. Jiang Shangyu thought silently. A domain had begun to bloom in his palm and was constantly condensing. Li Guangtu was indeed nearby. He did not approach the battlefield of Wang Xiaoyao and Mungeizer Xuanga, nor did he go to Mount Dibing. Instead, he chose to stand under a dense tree in the middle of the battlefield. The wind and snow covered the sky and the earth. He stood quietly, and his body was covered with wind and snow. All his aura was completely restrained. Standing quietly under the tree and observing the situation of Mount Dibing and Wang Xiaoyao, he looked like a snowman. He had been standing here for 2 days. A few hours before the final battle, an elite of the Beihai Internal Security Force patrolling nearby passed by him and even stuck a branch on his head, which was covered with wind and snow. The branch was still stuck on his head, which looked a little funny. In a state of extreme concealment, he raised his head and silently looked at the golden saber light and the colorful sword energy in the air. His eyes narrowed little by little. Subtle sword energy surged out of his body little by little, quietly filling every grain of wind and snow on his body. Wang Xiaoyao was the most surprising person tonight. He was also the biggest surprise of the joint forces. When the outcome of the battle between him and Moongazer Xuanga was so important that it could directly affect the outcome of the final battle in Beihai and even Li Tianlan's life and death, no one could deny Wang Xiaoyao's contribution in this final battle. Li Guangtu raised his head and quietly looked at Wang Xiaoyao in the air. He calculated the angle and the distance, silently waiting for the opportunity to make a move. Compared with Zhang Shangyu's hesitation, he was very sure that Li Tianlan would definitely make a move. At that time, the whole battlefield might have some unexpected changes. Through the wind and snow, Li Guangtu's eyes were lonely and indifferent. The main purpose of his coming to Beihai this time was to kill Li Tianlan and get the resources of Emperor Dong's palace. As for allies, Chen Fengqing was an ally. Besides that, he didn't think he had any allies. He teamed up with Zhang Shangyu to get rid of Li Tianlan, that was all. If there was a chance, Wang Xiaoyao, Zhang Shangyu, and everyone else. If he could kill them, Li Guangtu naturally didn't want to let them go. In the silent wind and snow, he took a gentle step forward and looked at the sky more and more attentively. The colorful light rose against the sky. The golden saber light kept condensing and shining, chopping down crazily. Moongazer Xuanga's body accelerated. 100 meters, 50 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. Boom! The sword light flew, and Moongazer Xuanga's slender body finally fell to the ground. The moment his feet touched the ground, Moongazer Xuanga suddenly opened her eyes. Her figure disappeared. The bloated figure in a black robe in everyone's sight also disappeared. Only the sword light was still flying. The meteor rose from the ground in an instant. With a loud bang, the colorful sword energy all over the sky gathered into a bunch. The sharp edge shattered the golden saber light in an instant and appeared in front of Wang Xiaoyao. At this moment, the edge of the sword could no longer be described as swift. It almost ignored the distance. Wang Xiaoyao, whose eyes were scarlet, seemed to be completely stimulated. His body didn't dodge. Facing the sword light piercing his heart, he raised Xinggu in his hand and chopped directly at Moongazer Xuanga's head. They perished together. Puff! With a dull sound, the cicada's blade directly pierced Wang Xiaoyao's heart. There was no blood. Countless sword energy frantically flowed back and was directly pressed back into Moongazer Xuanga's body by an irresistible force. The blade of Xinggu froze above Moongazer Xuanga's head. Li Tianlan's figure directly appeared between the two. He reached out and directly pulled Moongazer Xuanga to his side. It was too late to do anything. In an instant, the majestic sword energy and the extremely condensed domain directly broke out from Li Tianlan's side. 30-meter mortal world. For the first time, the most powerful defensive unique skill of the Jiang family of South America left its master. The moment Li Tianlan appeared, Zhang Shangyu's body directly turned into a phantom, 100 meters away, and almost directly narrowed the distance between him and Li Tianlan in half a second. He opened his palm, and the domain that had been brewing for a long time completely enveloped Li Tianlan's body. The extremely condensed domain was compressed crazily, directly imprisoning Li Tianlan's body within a range of more than 10 meters. As the 30-meter mortal world formed around Li Tianlan, a sword light so powerful that it almost shattered heaven and earth suddenly lit up from the ground. The moment Li Tianlan's eyes saw the light, Li Guangtu, who had been hiding silently on the ground, had directly appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The 24 moves of sword break of the sky. Everyone was waiting for this moment. The battle on Mount Dibing completely stopped. The 30-meter mortal world created by Zhang Shangyu instantly turned into absolute darkness. In the darkness, all the attacks that completely existed in Zhang Shangyu's imagination were concretized, pulling Li Tianlan's body crazily and affecting his balance. The black domain outside the 30-meter mortal world began to collapse inward, and the outer domain space became extremely soft. Zhang Shangyu's eyes were calm and indifferent. For today's opportunity, he had waited for decades. He had absolute confidence in his domain. Dongsheng Huangtu might ignore everything in his heyday. But now Li Tianlan couldn't break his 30-meter mortal world in a short time. Outside of his domain, he could make his domain undergo different changes. Li Tianlan couldn't break his domain. This also meant that neither Li Kuangtu nor anyone else could break his domain. Jiang Shangyu himself couldn't even cancel the domain in a short time. But being unable to cancel it didn't mean that it couldn't be changed. The edge of the domain of the 30-meter mortal world was constantly turbulent. The deep darkness, like waves of water, became soft, deep, and irregular. Jiang Shangyu attacked crazily. He was getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan. The mighty power in his hands turned into translucent airwaves one after another. On Mount Dibbing, Tianhai Wuji suddenly turned around and unsheathed his long saber. His body jumped up like a meteor, and a waterfall-like saber light burst out from his hands in an instant. It was endless. Hundreds and thousands of saber lights gathered together and poured down in Tianhai Wuji's hands. All the light rushed in the direction of Li Tianlan. Yagyu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji attacked almost at the same time. Above the night sky, Jifeng raining sword. Mount Dibbing was completely illuminated by the sword light in an instant. Gale, flying snow, raging fire, thunder, and endless light and shadow burst out in Yagyu Kurumi's hands and turned into fierce and violent sword energy. The sword energy and the saber light converged and merged perfectly, and then turned into pure power. Li Kuangtu appeared at the edge of the domain. The sword light that broke the sky was condensed into a small beam by him. The sword in his hand directly pierced into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. Jiang Guochu also attacked with all his strength. His domain and Jiang Shangyu's domain merged perfectly. Or it could be said that Jiang Shangyu's domain swallowed Jiang Guochu's domain, so that the edge of the 30-meter mortal world, which temporarily trapped Li Tianlan and Mochizuki Xuanga, became softer. Countless blazing white lights like holy light burst out in an instant. Moraid's figure was like a mad bull. He roared and rushed forward, waving his fists. White fist shadows were connected into one, and they completely hid into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. He was originally an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. After being crowned by the Pope, he was even closer to the peak of the invincible realm. He could even be regarded as the weakest expert at the peak of the invincible realm. At this time, when he broke out with all his strength, he was even more terrifying than Yagyu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji. Nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm on Mount Dibbing were also desperately attacking at the same time. The power of nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm gathered together, which was almost far beyond the full outbreak of an ordinary expert of the invincible realm. Countless lights and shadows completely covered the battlefield where Mochizuki Xuanga and Wang Xiaoyao fought. It was dazzling. For a moment, no one could see what was happening around Li Tianlan. Except for Wang Xiaoyao, all the experts of the invincible realm were desperately attacking. The 30-meter mortal world that trapped Li Tianlan was extremely strong. At this time, the constantly fluctuating edge of the domain seemed to have become a container that absorbed everyone's power at this moment. Li Kuangtu, Jiang Shangyu, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jiang Guochu, and Moraid. Two of them were beyond the peak of the invincible realm. One was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. 3 were invincible realm experts. Nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm. Without any hesitation or reservation, this was almost all the high-end combat capability of the Dark World. Everyone seized this opportunity, but at the same time, they poured their strongest power on Li Tianlan. People in the world attacked Beihai together. At this moment, it became people in the world killing Li Tianlan together. The incomparably strong 30-meter mortal world carried everyone's power and was almost completely deformed. The domain let out a cracking sound. Everyone knew that the moment the domain broke, Li Tianlan was besieged by everyone present at the same time. Chosen One? Dong Huang? What could they do? Everyone looked at Li Tianlan coldly. Li Tianlan's figure was completely submerged in the black 30-meter mortal world, blurred. Suddenly, there was a light in the deep and obscure darkness. In the domain, Mochizuki Song, whose consciousness had become a little dizzy, managed to take off the black bracelet in her hand. She didn't give it to Li Tianlan. Instead, she directly threw the bracelet into the 13-story building surrounding the two of them. The sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly stopped for a moment. The black bracelet turned into a black sniper rifle. It was not in the form of a sword. But in this state, the Dark Saint spear directly found its own orbit and position in the sword formation of the 13-story building. The spear and the sword rotated around Li Tianlan at the same time. The domain twisted wildly, faster and faster. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and a little cruel. He slowly stretched out his palm. Crack! The rotating sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly emitted endless dazzling light. This was not sword energy. It had nothing to do with the sword or the domain. It was like pure light. Or, it was pure energy. The sword formation of the 13-story building disappeared completely. The huge Xianyuan blade appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. At the moment when the domain was about to break, between heaven and earth, Li Tianlan's clear, indifferent, and infinitely majestic voice echoed in the night sky, one word at a time. Where I stand, Xianyuan blade was dazzling, and the colorful light kept flowing. It was pure light. It passed through the absolute darkness without any attack and directly penetrated the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. Li Tianlan's voice sounded with the shuttling of the light. Forbid the domain. Whoosh! The 30-meter mortal world, which was distorted to the extreme, began to rotate in the opposite direction in an instant. Before anyone could react, it became calm and weak. Only Li Tianlan's voice was still echoing, like a god. Where I stand, sword light is forbidden. There was no sound. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world was broken. In the domain, both the saber light and the sword energy disappeared in an instant. The colorful light was mighty and obliterated everything in the blink of an eye. The sword of Xianyuan blade was dimmed to the extreme. In the last afterglow of the light, Li Tianlan's voice sounded again. Forbid here. Forbid the domain. Forbid the sword light. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu's faces changed dramatically in an instant. Without any hesitation, the two of them rose directly into the sky. Li Tianlan's last forbid sounded. The two of them suddenly fell to the ground. The next second, Li Tianlan's figure directly rushed out of the dissipating domain. Mochizuki Song's body appeared beside Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao felt cold for a moment and subconsciously held her body. Li Tianlan disappeared. Tianguang's sword appeared beside Wang Xingxiao. Tianguang's sword light was completely dim, like a shadow. Shadow? No! An extremely angry roar suddenly sounded from Mount Dibing. Li Tianlan's figure directly changed places with Tianguang's sword in an instant. Puff! In the dull piercing sound, the huge blade of the indestructible Xianyuan blade directly cut open Tianhai Wuji's chest. Blood rained all over the sky. Tianhai Wuji, with a blank look in his eyes, subconsciously wanted to lower his head. But his line of sight suddenly flew up. The head of the first Grandmaster of East Island flew up into the sky with a lot of blood without warning. His chest was broken, his heart was broken, and his head flew up. The so-called Grandmaster, the so-called invincible realm. In an instant, it was like a blade of grass that was directly cut off. No. You. Yagyu Kurumi's sorrowful and indignant roar stopped abruptly. Xianyuan blade in Li Tianlan's hand disappeared in an instant. One after another, the divine weapons suddenly scattered around Mount Dibing and turned into shadows one after another. Li Tianlan took a step out, instantly changed places with the shadow, and appeared in front of Yagyu Kurumi. Yagyu Kurumi opened his mouth, and his roar was directly suppressed. Great power was poured into his arms, and Li Tianlan suddenly exerted force. Yagyu Kurumi's upper body was pressed down. Knee strike. The knee strike of dual wind and thunder veins. Unimaginable power and speed. Extremely violent and extremely simple movement. Bang! In the dull sound, Yagyu Kurumi's upper body suddenly spat out a lot of blood. His chest was suddenly smashed under the violent impact, and a lot of blood rushed into his head. Under the great pressure, countless blood, like bullets or swords, directly pierced Yagyu Kurumi's skull. His whole head was like a watermelon smashed by a sledgehammer, and blood and brain matter suddenly burst out. Instant kill. The second instant kill. In the twinkling of an eye, the two grandmasters of East Island had completely fallen, and they died without a whole body. Li Tianlan's figure flickered. More than a dozen shadows kept moving on Mount Dibbing, and the shadows covered the whole area. Wherever Li Tianlan and the shadows were, everything around was completely his domain. He could appear in any place where the shadows existed, and he could also disappear from any place where the shadows existed. He came and went unpredictably, regardless of the distance. One after another, the domains shrank crazily. Jiang Guochu, who was in a violent state of mind, had a face full of horror. He and Moraid gathered together for the first time. The two of them stood side by side, and they desperately wanted to rush out of Mount Dibbing. Boom! The black shadow flickered instantly, and the mighty power tore Jiang Guochu's domain from behind in an instant. At the same time, an extremely condensed domain once again enveloped Jiang Guochu and Moraid. It was a close call. The great power pulled the two of them directly out of Li Tianlan's attack range. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu appeared in front of Li Tianlan at the same time. Li Guangtu squinted, and there was deep fear in his eyes. But Jiang Shangyu's eyes were full of rage, and he almost lost his mind. Li Tianlan. He squeezed out a low roar from his throat, word by word. You have to die. You have to die. Think about how to survive yourself first. Li Tianlan said in a calm voice. The somewhat unfamiliar and strange chat stopped abruptly when Li Tianlan appeared in front of Mochizuki and Mochizuki. The helicopter hovered in the air. The rain outside the window was getting heavier and heavier. Xing Tian's huge body curled up in the cabin of the helicopter. He lowered his head and remained motionless. Saint and Xianyuan Wushang stared at the picture of Mount Dibbing on the screen at the same time, but their reactions were different. They saw Jiang Shangyu attack with all his strength, and they saw Li Guangtu break out with all his strength. They saw Moraid, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jiang Guochu, and more than a dozen top superiors of the half-step invincible realm working together without hesitation. The dark domain of the 30-meter mortal world was constantly twisting and rotating. Until the light in the domain lit up, and Li Tianlan's voice came out. Saint's solemn face slightly relaxed for a moment. Xianyuan Wushang sighed and laughed. It's the law of sword. Has it come to this step? The law of sword? Hearing the term that he had never heard of, Saint frowned. What's that? It's what you see now. This is the law of sword. In other words, it's probably the limit state of the heavenly sun. Big Brother originally needed to make further breakthroughs before he could use the law of sword. Of course, he also needed Wei. Well, and Wu Qing's cooperation. Now he has reached this step. Maybe Big Brother has just found something amazing, Wei. Tut, he shook his head with a headache. Wu Qing's state is also very important. Who the hell are you? Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang and asked slowly. He had been in the cabin for nearly 20 minutes, but Xianyuan Wushang's attitude toward him had been very strange. Some things he said were also inexplicable. For example, the so-called law of sword. Saint had never heard of this before. Now. I'm a doctor of Emperor Dong's palace. Xianyuan Wushang laughed. What about before? Saint asked without relaxing. Before, Xianyuan Wushang was in a trance and suddenly asked, if I tell you that there was no before, would you believe me? Here it comes again, Saint cursed in his heart. This kind of inexplicable conversation had been repeated many times. Hearing it again, he didn't even know what to say. I'm kidding. Xianyuan Wushang gave a hollow laugh. Before, you just treated me as a tourist. But if you don't mind, I'd like to be your brother. I have no more or less brothers, but I don't have brothers of unknown origin. Saint's voice was a little cold. Is origin really so important? Xianyuan Wushang said with a smile, what matters is what I've done and what I can do in the future. What can you do? Saint raised his eyebrows slightly. I'm a doctor. First of all, I can definitely save people. For example, the real sister-in-law. Well, you should know that I'm not talking about the one in Tiannan now, but the one in Europe. No, that's not right either. They are a little strange. Strictly speaking, they are not real or fake. They are all real. They are the same person. You. Saint's expression changed instantly. He suddenly stood up and grabbed Xianyuan Wushang's shoulder. Don't get excited. Take your time, take your time. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and pressed Saint's body back to the seat. Another example is that I now control the weapon control authority of the entire East Island. Do you know what that means? Now in Beihai, there is no enemy, not even a bullet. Everything I can control will be given to Emperor Dong's palace as a greeting gift. Tut, a brother like me is so generous. You don't even want to acknowledge it. What are you doing, buddy? Saint's brain suddenly became extremely chaotic. Xianyuan Wushang had already talked about greeting gifts before. But what happened to Qin Weibai shocked him greatly. Qin Weibai couldn't have told him these things, so how did he know? How much do you know about the boss? Saint shook his head hard, looked at Xianyuan Wushang seriously, and said in a deep voice. Not much at the moment. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. But I'll go to the European continent to talk to her after this. Since I can tell you, you can trust me. I can cure her. Of course, it takes time, or rather, the right time. Even if I want to wake her up now, I won't do it. It's a good thing for everyone that she's in this state for the time being. You? Talk to her? Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang strangely. The boss is unconscious and in a bad state now. How are you going to talk to her? I have my ways. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head slightly and said nothing. Saint was silent for a while. Suddenly, he looked at Xing Tian, who was curled up in the corner of the cabin without saying a word. In this situation, Xing Tian was completely different from the fierce man who pulled the bow and shot Gravik to death outside the cabin. Now, his huge body was curled up, and he looked like a doormat. Saint shook his head slightly. What about him? His strength is limited, and so is mine. We can do things that a lot of people can't do, but some things are one-off. For example, he shot your so-called superior of the invincible realm to death, and I control the weapon system of East Island. These are all one-off things, and they'll be gone after they're used. At least in Emperor Dong's palace, I hope everyone can treat me as a pure doctor. As for him, I think it's reasonable to arrange him to be a PE teacher. He paused and continued to smile. Don't worry. I have no hostility toward Emperor Dong's palace. Everything I've done can prove it. He looked at Saint and said softly, maybe, you should look out of the window. Saint was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly realized that the fighting sound outside the cabin was getting smaller and smaller, almost disappearing. He was shocked, stood up subconsciously, and rushed to the cabin door. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School was at the foot of the mountain. But it was getting quieter and quieter. Saint stood in front of the cabin door, looking at everything below, and kept silent for a long time. In the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School, everyone in the Nightmare Army also kept silent for a long time. Saint blinked and suddenly didn't know what to say. It was still raining outside the cabin. The raindrops fell on the ground. But the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School had completely changed. The soldiers of the Nightmare Army were full of vigor, and there were few enemies who could fight back. Most importantly, as the rain fell, flowers were blooming on the land of Jifeng Sword Raining School at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bright colors almost occupied the entire headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School. The rain was dripping in the air. An unimaginably rich life force was brewing between the heavens and the earth. This, Saint turned his head in disbelief and looked at Xianyuan Wushang, who called himself a doctor. This is? Come and see. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan on the screen and said gently, it seems that something interesting is going to appear. Chapter 10:18. The body was broken, the head rolled down, and the blood splashed. Under the night sky, before the cold and majestic voice of prohibition fell, the bodies of the two grandmasters of the invincible realm in East Island had been separated. Life and death in an instant. Abruptness, astonishment, panic, and panic. Before anyone could react, Li Tianlan's figure flashed continuously. How long did it take? Half a second? Or, in a shorter time, Li Tianlan almost directly reversed the situation. At the cost of consuming most of ruthless energy, he exchanged the lives of two superiors of the invincible realm and saved flaming fire. All kinds of thoughts flashed in Li Tianlan's mind for a moment. The next second, Jiang Shangyu appeared in front of him. Jiang Shangyu's reaction speed was not slow. The energy of the final promotion of the 13th floor turned every divine weapon into a shadow, covering most of the battlefield. With the existence of the shadow, Li Tianlan could use the shadow formula to appear anywhere at will regardless of the distance. As long as Jiang Shangyu came half a second later, Jiang Guochu was doomed to die on the spot, not to mention the stronger Moraid. He escaped death. Jiang Guochu, with a pale face, stood in Jiang Shangyu's domain and breathed heavily. The violent panic was almost uncontrollable in his heart. He had seen death, and he had also seen the death of an invincible realm expert. The death of an invincible realm expert was not called death, but fall. This word was enough to explain the status of an invincible realm expert in the dark world. The death of any invincible realm expert was a big deal for the dark world. Jiang Guochu never thought that an invincible realm expert could be so fragile. In less than a second, two comrades whose strength was above his died instantly. In her sight, Li Tianlan was still at the moment when he killed Tianhai Wuji. Before the shadow disappeared, Li Tianlan had already killed Yagyu Kurasumi and appeared behind him. Fast. Unimaginably fast. The extreme speed turned into absolute power and killing intent at that moment. The so-called Kendo of East Island and the so-called domain of the Jiang family of South America were all like a joke at that moment. Jiang Guochu felt like an ant, a pale piece of paper, or a withered grass. Everything about him was so fragile in front of Li Tianlan. It seemed that if Li Tianlan touched him a little, his body would be like the two grandmasters in East Island. His flesh and blood would fly, and even his bones would disappear. He gasped. Out of instinct, he hid behind Jiang Shangyu. Death and eternal silence had just brushed past him at a very close distance. Everything about the Jiang family of South America had almost become history. Ups and downs, great surprise and great joy. Jiang Guochu's whole body kept trembling, and his eyes became a little dull. You should think about how you're going to survive first. Li Tianlan's calm voice rang out. Jiang Guochu's body trembled again when he heard it. Jiang Shangyu frowned slightly. His domain quickly spread out and completely covered Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was motionless. The shadow transformed by the divine weapon and the shadow transformed by the shadow formula. Dozens of shadows were almost everywhere on this battlefield, which could be called ghostly shadows. The shadows were not dead. Each shadow consciously adjusted its position under Li Tianlan's will. He was not stingy with ruthless energy. With the last afterglow of ruthless, even in Jiang Shangyu's domain, his perception was still clear and sharp. The domain spread steadily. Within the scope of the domain, Jiang Shangyu did not feel anything unusual. Jiang Guochu's mentality seemed to have a huge problem, so that his attention was completely distracted. But Moraid, who had also just brushed shoulders with death, was full of fighting spirit. More than a dozen superiors of the half-step invincible realm, whom Li Tianlan had not taken seriously just now, were gathering quickly. In the air above the domain, the sword energy overlapped. Li Guangtu's body became incomparably illusory in the sword energy, but the illusory sword energy also locked on Li Tianlan. The backup force of Mount Dibing's Heaven Punishment Troop was nothing to worry about. Wang Xingxiao was nothing to worry about. Ruthless energy had been bottomed out. 3 prohibitions. Ruthless resolved the incomparably huge attack at that moment, but it did not cause any harm to them. They only consumed a part of their physical strength. But Li Tianlan had lost Ruthless now, leaving only more than a dozen shadows of Xianyuan Feng. They had lost 2 superiors of the invincible realm, which was indeed a heavy loss. But under such circumstances, facing Li Tianlan, they could almost be said to have an absolute advantage. Deliberately mystifying. Jiang Shanyu looked at Li Tianlan with no expression on his face. This landscape will bury you together, so you won't feel wronged. Ha, Li Tianlan laughed. His sword energy rushed out of Mount Dibing, mixed with the wind and snow, crossed the stage of formidable person, and rushed into Beihai. He did not understand the law of sword Tao, but just now, with the cooperation of Ruthless, when he tried his best to prohibit the sword light and the domain, he suddenly noticed a subtle but almost ubiquitous sword energy. Compared with the incomparably vast sword energy he had just felt in the air, this sword energy was clearer and more real. The most important thing was that even with the cooperation of Ruthless, he could prohibit all the sword light and the domain, but he still could not affect this sword energy that had existed for an unknown period of time. The sword energy had been increasing. The speed was not fast, but it was extremely stable. Li Tianlan finally understood the meaning of Wang Xingxiao's words. Worryless was not in Mount Dibing. He was in Beihai. The so-called Beihai was not Beihai province. It was the Beihai behind the stage of formidable person of Mount Dibing, the boundless sea of Beihai. This was the sword energy that Li Tianlan had been waiting for. He did not expect that in the shortest time, he had reached a certain tacit understanding with the 2 brothers of Beihai at the same time. He looked at Jiang Shangyu with cold eyes, with incomparably firm killing intent. Jiang Shangyu took a step forward. Boom! The night sky, which was scattered by the wind and snow, seemed to be torn apart by Jiang Shangyu at this moment. The space within a radius of thousands of meters was completely broken. Jiang Shangyu stretched out his palm, and countless black thunderbolts suddenly appeared within thousands of meters. The completely violent thunderbolts bared their fangs and brandished their claws, rushing directly to Li Tianlan. The battlefield in Mount Dibing was completely chaotic. In the chaotic void, the sword energy of nothingness turned into the most thorough reality in an instant. Li Guangtu's figure appeared again. He made a gesture with both hands. The ninth sky was endless. This was another change of the 24 moves of sword, a unique skill that simulated other unique skills. This time, what the expressionless Li Guangtu simulated was Li Tianlan's kendo. Cutting the sky. Breaking the sea. Shattering style. One after another, the sword light illuminated the endless black thunderbolts. In the void domain, neither Li Guangtu nor Jiang Shangyu held back. More than a dozen top experts of the half-step invincible realm joined forces again. But this time, it was no longer an attack. Everyone's aura was connected into one in an instant. Everyone's sword energy, strength, and willpower were constantly superimposed. Morade's pupils had completely turned into pure silver white. He walked out from behind Jiang Shangyu and perfectly integrated with the power of more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm. His aura temporarily increased wildly in an instant, directly crossing the threshold of the peak of the invincible realm and stopping at the peak of the invincible realm. This was the unique skill of the Holy Zone. It could also be said to be the most powerful unique skill of the Holy Zone in the state of coronation, pure faith. At this moment, more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm gathered almost all their power together and temporarily lent it to Morade. The extremely powerful aura burst out from every corner. Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, Morade. Siege. It was the highest standard siege in this era. At this moment, they had no other opponents in their eyes except Li Tianlan. Mount Dibing shook violently. A few kilometers away from Mount Dibing, the night trembled slightly. A figure with torn clothes and blood all over his body suddenly walked out of the trembling night. Before his body landed, he coughed violently and spat out mouthfuls of blood. Wang Xiaoyao's face was as pale as paper, and his aura had almost fallen to the bottom. But compared to the most dangerous moment just now, he was still alive. Wang Yuesong couldn't stop his saber. He couldn't stop Wang Yuesong's sword either. So at the moment when they were about to die together, Wang Xiaoyao withdrew from the battlefield. Almost no one noticed his movement. Except Li Tianlan. Because what Wang Xiaoyao used was the unique technique that he had traded with Sword of Emperor Path from Li Tianlan. Shadow Formula. The incomplete version of Shadow Formula. Wang Xiaoyao's shadow was not aggressive, but it could change positions with him. No one knew if this day had been planned for a long time. In short, at that moment, Shadow Formula completely solved Wang Xiaoyao's situation. Li Tianlan, who was extremely sensitive to shadows, found something wrong at the first time and entered the battlefield directly. Wang Xiaoyao didn't want to die. He didn't want to die together. Li Tianlan didn't want Wang Yuesong to die either. So at the moment when Wang Xiaoyao and the shadow changed positions, Li Tianlan appeared beside Wang Yuesong. He didn't know if this could be regarded as a tacit understanding between him and Li Tianlan. But what happened in that instant just now and the result of it undoubtedly satisfied both sides. Wang Xiaoyao laughed. His shadow formula came from Li Tianlan. He believed that Li Tianlan could feel his movement. And the result now, Li Tianlan didn't let him down. In the night, he managed to stand up straight and looked at the chaotic Mount Dibing in the distance. That battlefield might still need his strength. But he had no intention of participating in it. No one knew the outcome of this battle, but Wang Xiaoyao was keenly aware of the danger contained in it. Win or lose, he muttered to himself and shook his head slightly. He had done everything he could. He suppressed Wang Yuesong and created a great opportunity for Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu. As for now, Wang Xiaoyao looked down at his watch. Blood had dyed the dial red. But the needle was still moving tenaciously. It was 6:00 in the morning, Beihai time. The sky was still dark. Wang Xiaoyao took a deep breath and turned to leave. Chapter 10:19. Black was not the night. The deep darkness surged and spread wildly on Mount Dibing. The night was completely torn apart by his hands. The endless black thunderbolts, like a black tide, occupied the entire battlefield in an incomparably domineering manner. It was not only an all-out fight, but also a life-and-death fight. Jiang Shangyu's aura completely changed the moment he attacked. His eyes seemed to have lost the last bit of warmth and became extremely cold and crazy. The few allies were completely covered by his domain. The next second, the black thunderbolts, like a black tide, suddenly twisted. All the sounds seemed to be completely swallowed up. The moment the thunderbolts twisted, dozens of reserve forces of the All Heavens troops on the edge of the battlefield who had not had time to withdraw turned into nothingness in the thunderbolts on the spot. The flat ground was disintegrating rapidly. The buildings collapsed silently, and the plants withered completely. The black thunderbolts twisted with the absolute power of destruction, destroying everything in the area they covered. The domain shook wildly. The black thunderbolts kept coming out of the broken space, and there were more and more of them. They were boundless and silent. Jiang Shangyu, whose eyes turned scarlet almost in an instant, strode toward Li Tianlan. For the first time, weapons appeared in his hands. Even when he challenged Li Tianlan to a duel in Tiannan, he had never revealed his weapons. They were not swords, daggers, or daggers. Jiang Shangyu's weapons turned out to be a pair of extremely ferocious silver arm guards. Two arm guards that perfectly fit Jiang Shangyu's arms were buckled on his hands, wrapping from his fingers to his shoulders. One by one, ferocious barbs came out of the arm guards. The silver-white arm guards shone with a faint light. They were extremely soft and tough, changing at will with Jiang Shangyu's movements. Countless black thunderbolts burst out mightily under the pull of the silver arm guards, drowning and destroying everything. The darkness was turbulent, and the light was shining. As the person with the lowest actual combat capability on the scene, Moraid's movements were even more violent than Jiang Shangyu's. The unique skill Pure Faith, which had been passed down by the Vatican for hundreds of years, was not a taboo, but few people had used it for hundreds of years. Naturally, there were drawbacks and many restrictions. First of all, this unique skill required extremely high physical strength. The invincible realm was just the beginning. Under normal circumstances, the real peak of the invincible realm was the best choice. Secondly, the biggest drawback of Pure Faith was that it would cause people to lose most of their rationality. At the same time, Moraid received the impact of the power of nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm. If he wanted to bear this, he needed not only an extremely strong body, but also an absolutely tough spirit. The spiritual crown of the sanctuary made him barely able to accept all this. But the power of more than 10 top experts of the half-step invincible realm poured into his body, and the power that was almost out of control crazily hit every blood vessel and muscle in his body. Although the severe pain didn't make Moraid collapse, it had already made him completely crazy. The moment the black thunderbolt appeared, he roared and rushed to Li Tianlan's side. The deathly still black and the pure white shone together. In the dazzling light and shadow, transparent sword chi penetrated the light and darkness one after another, silently stabbing Li Tianlan's vital parts all over his body. The sword energy was not very eye-catching, but the sharp killing intent in it was even more exaggerated than the black thunderbolts that Jiang Shangyu had triggered all over the sky. At this moment, Mount Dibbing was the real peak of the dark world and the real peak of this era. While he was in a trance, scenes flashed through his mind, from small to large, as if he was looking at flowers on horseback. Li Tianlan still remembered when he picked up a sword for the first time when he was a child. At that time, Li Honghe was still in his peak state, but the great pressure made his back slightly bent, and he was no longer in his prime. It was a very ordinary summer in the camp. The camp, which was covered by the dense woods, was stuffy. He held a wooden sword and aimed at the first opponent in his life, a poplar, again and again. As his guide on martial arts, Li Hong had demonstrated a simple forward stab 3 times, and then asked him if he saw it clearly. At that time, little Tianlan nodded innocently, holding the sword, and imitating his grandfather's movements again and again. That year, little Tianlan was 4 years old. For 2 years, he kept repeating that sword, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, hundreds of thousands of times. His body was overdrawn, his shoulders were swollen, and his arms were cramped. The evaluation he got was always the same. Not fast enough, not simple enough, no power. That sword, the most basic forward stab, Li Tianlan practiced for 2 years. On the day of his 6th birthday, when Li Tianlan directly pierced the thick ancient tree in front of him with a wooden sword, he saw the map of God of War of the Li family for the first time. Do you know who we are? We are a group of people who can't control their own destiny. My hand can still hold the sword, but I'm old, and I can't control my destiny. Tianlan, I may be too strict with you. You are my grandson, the future master of the Li family, and this identity can't be changed. I hope that your hand can not only hold the sword, but also hold the destiny of the Li family, and your own destiny. The picture kept changing. With the balanced chapter as the foundation, Li Tianlan first came into contact with the invincible chapter, the taboo of martial arts of the Li family, at the age of 8. He began to meditate at the age of 9, trying to enter the 4 realms of martial arts. Just after his 10th birthday, Li Tianlan entered the chi-controlling realm for the first time. From then on, martial arts progressed rapidly. He entered the ice-condensing realm at the age of 12, and his realm was suppressed by Li Honghe to hone his sword energy. He entered the fire-flaming realm at the age of 15. 17 years old, peak of the fire-flaming realm. At the age of 17, he met Thunder God of the Dongqing clan for the first time and was led to the desert prison by him. Fire Man, fighting, entered the thunder-shocking realm, then destroyed his realm and recultivated in the chi-controlling realm. 19 years old, ice-condensing realm, Sky Academy. Qin Weibai, Wang Yuetong, East Emperor Palace. The final battle of Heaven Capital, Dongqing Rushi, trekking thousands of miles, wind and snow filled the sky of the polar region. Half-step invincible realm. The chaos of the snow country, the day of judgment, the day of termination, all of it was vigorous and vigorous. Until today, until now. Li Kuangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Moraid. The pinnacle of martial arts. Li Tianlan was 24 years old. In the blink of an eye, it had been 5 years since he left the Li family and came to Huading. The scenes of the past were so clear to him. Invincible in the world, number one in the world. Now, for the first time, he truly stood at the peak of the dark world. What greeted him was overwhelming thunderbolts, violent and hidden sword energy, and sharp and dazzling light. Everything was the scenery at the peak. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little lonely. This night was his new peak, but it was also a new beginning. The entangled and changing light and shadow arrived in an instant. He pulled out the sword. The huge blade of Xianyuan Feng suddenly turned over in Li Tianlan's hand. All of a sudden, a colorful radiance lit up. Ruthless had almost no energy. So the dazzling sword light at present undoubtedly came from Li Tianlan. A rainbow suddenly lit up in the shining black and white. The rainbow in the air turned into a natural circle, and then instantly shrank. The colorful halo that shrank to the extreme completely protected Li Tianlan. In the silent black thunderbolts, Xianyuan Feng's sword body was light. It trembled slightly. In an instant, Li Tianlan's figure appeared directly in front of Li Kuangtu. "Watch carefully," Li Tianlan said lightly. He held Xianyuan Feng in one hand and made a seal with the other hand. Boom! There was a sudden loud noise in the silent and broken space. The black thunderbolts that attacked Li Tianlan crazily were completely shattered in an instant, and the colorful sword light suddenly broke out. Ninth Emptiness and Infinity. This was one of the strongest unique skills that Li Kuangtu created after studying the 24 moves of sword. The most powerful thing was that it could imitate and copy other people's sword energy. This unique skill could be said to be the core move of the Immortality Seal. But now, Li Tianlan made a seal with one hand, and it was also Ninth Emptiness and Infinity. But what he imitated was not Li Kuangtu's sword energy. Li Kuangtu's face suddenly changed. His figure instantly changed from real to nothingness. His figure flickered and retreated quickly. His face was tense, but there was a touch of absurdity in his eyes. What Li Tianlan used was his unique skill. He recognized it at first glance. But the Ninth Emptiness and Infinity in Li Tianlan's hand made him feel familiar and strange. Li Tianlan's Ninth Emptiness and Infinity imitated Li Kuangtu's Ninth Emptiness and Infinity. Li Kuangtu couldn't understand this kind of operation in a short time. He didn't even know what it would simulate. But the next second, the flying sword energy directly gave him the most direct answer. He simulated Li Tianlan's swordsmanship. Heaven-cutting move, shattering move, sea-breaking move, the connection between several sword energy and him was directly out of control. The hidden and sharp sword energy instantly bloomed with colorful light. The sword energy crossed the sky and rushed directly to Li Kuangtu without any pause. The sword energy was out of control? Li Kuangtu was at a loss for a moment. In his sight, Li Tianlan's figure had rushed directly to his side with the sword energy. Unparalleled move. Several sword energy directly merged with Xianyuan Feng the moment Li Tianlan raised his sword. A bolt of 7-colored lightning suddenly flashed in the chaotic night. The sword light was overwhelming. Clang! Li Kuangtu suddenly reached out his hand. A piece of black metal slipped out of his sleeve. He swung his palm hard, and the black metal instantly extended. 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, in the blink of an eye, a huge black sickle with a length of more than 3 meters appeared in Li Guangtu's hand. The sickle kept waving against the wind in the night. Li Guangtu's figure rotated like the wind, and the hysterical edge continuously chopped on the colorful sword light in front of him. Boom! The sword light was chopped into pieces. The colorful light flowed everywhere, illuminating the entire Mount Dibbing. The shadow on Mount Dibbing was moving. Li Tianlan took a step and appeared directly behind Li Guangtu. Playing the 24 moves of Sword of the Leaf family in front of me? Li Tianlan's voice was cold and gloomy. You're far from it. A dim yellow light suddenly lit up. All the sword energy completely condensed into one point. The 9th blade of dusk. Dusk broke the burning sky. Xianyuan Feng suddenly collided with the rotating sickle. Li Guangtu's body shook violently. He gritted his teeth and finally said the first words of the night. Are you also a member of the Li family? Just a bastard. The dragon roar suddenly rose to the sky. Azure dragon arrow, azure dragon cannon, flying dragon in the sky, dragon fighting in the wild, the violent power and sword energy surged wildly. Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu collided countless times in an instant. The same dragon fist. The same body movement. The same way of exerting force. In hundreds of years, this was almost the highest level of civil war in the Li family. Forward, forward, forward. Attack, attack, attack. Ruthlessness was ever-changing. Once again, it became a cloak that protected Li Tianlan's whole body. The corners of his clothes flew. In the shortest time, in a head-on fight, Li Guangtu was almost completely suppressed. He had not officially entered the invincible realm. But the frequency of his attacks was even faster. The dual wind and thunder veins greatly made up for his lack of strength. The endless vitality of the dragon vein could even allow him to slightly overdraw his body at any time. In this state, Li Tianlan was fully qualified to suppress Li Guangtu. The moment Li Guangtu fell into a disadvantageous position, the black thunderbolt swept over again. Li Tianlan's figure flashed away in an instant. Boom! The light and sword energy broke out at the same time. Dozens of meters away, Li Tianlan had completely smashed Moraid out. Jiang Shangyu suddenly turned back. The clenched fist passed from behind. Bang! The silver arm guard collided with the fist. The next second, Xianyuan Feng brought the sword light all over the sky and smashed on the arm guard like a storm. The moment the sparks flew out, Li Guangtu's figure was once again suppressed by Li Tianlan. Yes, the indifferent voice drifted in the air, and countless punches and kicks broke out in front of Moraid without warning. The infinite pure light collided with the fierce dragon fist, and Moraid's body flew out. Puff! In the dull sound, the bodies of the 2 superiors of the half-step invincible realm below were shattered into pieces of flesh on the spot by the huge force. The black thunderbolt surged. The colorful halo of sword energy rotated wildly, and Li Tianlan's body directly smashed the thunderbolt all over the sky. The sound of the arm guard and the long sword colliding brought about a lingering sound. There was already a large piece of flying snow in front of Li Guangtu. You have a chance. The bodies of the 2 superiors of the half-step invincible realm below collapsed again. Moraid's breath began to weaken, and he was trying to get closer to Jiang Shangyu. In his sight, Li Tianlan was still fighting with Moraid, and in his ears was the sound of the long sword colliding with the arm guard. The violent attack was right in front of him. The night was chaotic, and the snow was flying all over the sky. The extreme coldness with sword intent crazily shrouded him. Why not? Boom! The black thunderbolt that suddenly condensed directly protected Moraid. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of Jiang Shangyu. A small domain exploded in an instant. Cherish? Crack! The colorful lights suddenly burst out, and the sword energy was like a rainbow. In an instant, it collided with the black scythe countless times. Blood burst out of the perlicue. In the clear pane, the scythe that was more than 3 meters long was completely cut off. The rainbow-like sword light was dazzling, flashing wildly, spinning, and the sword energy soared into the sky, wantonly and majestic. The endless sharpness directly smashed the thunderbolt around Moraid, the sword edge tore the domain, and the sword energy cut off Moraid's chest armor. Jiang Shangyu's figure suddenly retreated in the sudden attack. "Where's your pride?" The sharp and condensed sword energy suddenly burst out on the half of Li Guangtu's scythe. Direct, crisp, and simple. Forward stab. The sword energy shone, shattering mountains and rivers. Clang. The sharp sword energy directly stabbed on the huge sword edge of Xianyuan Feng. The half of the scythe was completely broken. Blood flowed down from Li Tianlan's body, and his aura became more and more terrifying. Thunder. Li Guangtu, who lent me the sword in Ji City. Bang. The armor was broken, and the domain surrounded him. The domain was broken. Moraid's body was sent flying dozens of meters away by a punch, and a large amount of blood suddenly dripped down through the pure light. The domain that broke out on its own completely swallowed Li Tianlan. He waved the sword and swept it across. Like the sky and the sea, Li Tianlan's movements were extremely concise, and his every move carried an indescribable tension. The sword edge cut through the space, and the broken domain, driven by the sword energy, swept back to Jiang Shangyu. Li Guangtu's figure flashed, and he quickly retreated. But the voice followed him like a shadow. "Did you die in Mormons? What's left of your pride and dignity?" Boom! The colorful sword light shattered the sword energy around Li Guangtu. The huge sword edge cut across Li Guangtu's chest. The void was broken, and the night was boiling. Li Tianlan stopped and quietly looked at Li Guangtu, who was retreating, and said calmly, "What are you holding on for?" Crack! The domain condensed crazily, and the black thunderbolts were dense, surrounding the entire domain. Moraid, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu finally met and stood together. Li Tianlan let out a long breath and moved his body slightly. His face was pale, and his body was bleeding everywhere. A faint white mist wrapped him up. He looked at the opponents in front of him, and his eyes became sharper. Jiang Shangyu and the other two made the same action almost at the same time. The three super experts, who now represented the peak combat capability of the Dark World, shook their heads at the same time. They were dazzled. Li Tianlan was alone. But in less than a few seconds, the three of them seemed to be facing Li Tianlan at the same time. Fast. Incredibly fast. It was also incredibly weird. The shadow formula was fully exerted in Li Tianlan's hands to the extent that even Tribulation, the original creator, couldn't exert it. More than 20 shadows kept flashing. At the extreme speed, Li Tianlan's figure could appear anywhere at will. His speed was so fast that it even exceeded the reaction speed of Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu, so that in just a few seconds, the three of them were almost facing three Li Tianlans at the same time. At this moment, even Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu felt a little numb, not to mention Moraid, whose aura began to decline. This was like an exaggerated and somewhat weird solo show. Li Tianlan's figure flashed wildly, and his absolute speed even allowed his body to appear in different places at the same time. The instantaneous change left the three of them no room to fight back. Li Tianlan was also injured. But the vast white mist wrapped his body, and his injury was recovering at a speed almost visible to the naked eye. Cough, 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 cough. Moraid, whose face was pale, coughed violently, and blood gushed out of his mouth. His voice was hoarse and laborious. "Your Majesty, he has consumed a lot of physical strength. Even if he can recover from his injury, he can't recover his physical strength." "We can consume, Jiang Shangyu murmured to himself. In just a few seconds, he and Li Guangtu were both injured. Although the injuries were not serious, this scene was extremely disturbing. Li Tianlan's fighting style undoubtedly consumed a lot of physical strength. The most important thing was that although his combat capability surpassed the peak of the invincible realm and was only one step or even half a step away from the real supreme realm, Li Tianlan's body was directly at the half-step invincible realm. His physical strength could never support him for a long time. If not, he didn't need to stop at all. With the suppression power he showed just now, it would only take 5 or 6 seconds at most to kill Moraid and more than a dozen half-step invincible realm experts on the ground. In another 10 seconds or so, he and Li Guangtu would also be seriously injured. But Li Tianlan stopped. Obviously, his physical strength had begun to decline. If he continued, he might reveal his flaws. Li Tianlan couldn't bear such consumption. But could the three of them really bear it? Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Let's go together." They were not scattered. The three of them were closely connected. Together. Ha! Li Tianlan laughed with no expression on his face. "Have you forgotten something?" he said lightly. Jiang Shangyu frowned. Another voice came from another direction. It was calm, but it was filled with doubt. Since when did someone dare to ignore the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai in Mount Dibing? In an instant, Li Guangtu's and Jiang Shangyu's faces changed dramatically. They looked at Wang Xingxiao, who had landed on the stage of formidable person. In the dark, a piece of sword energy that could almost crush everything had begun to take shape quietly. Under the stage of formidable person, the remaining reserve forces of the all heavens began to gather quickly. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly flashed and appeared behind Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu. "You will die here." Wang Xingxiao's calm and indifferent voice kept echoing in the night sky. The sword energy that seemed to be able to suppress everything gathered in a very distant place. It seemed to have a faint connection with Wang Xingxiao. "Emperor Dong's palace is just our ally," Wang Xingxiao said softly. "Your opponent is the Wang family of Beihai, the invincible Wang family of Beihai." The wind and snow drifted. There was a faint touch of dawn between heaven and earth. The uneasiness in his heart suddenly broke out. Jiang Shangyu pointed at Wang Xingxiao without hesitation and roared, "Kill him." Moray did not hesitate. His whole body drew a blazing white light in the air and fiercely rushed to Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao raised his head and saw Moray's figure getting closer and closer. "After 2 years, the Dark World should take a look again," he said softly. "Take a look at the sword of Beihai." Moraid's figure shuttled in the air. His powerful aura almost made Wang Xingxiao breathless. Under the great pressure, Wang Xingxiao suddenly straightened his body. His voice resounded between heaven and earth. Every word was surging and impassioned. "The Wang family of Beihai." Accompanied by the wind and snow, the morning light, and the tide. His voice shook the alternating day and night. He shouted at the top of his lungs and swallowed thousands of miles. "Draw your sword." Boom! The majestic sword energy instantly filled the entire Mount Dibing. Everyone in the all heavens troop, including Wang Xingxiao. Everyone drew their swords at the same time. The sword energy that suddenly gathered together was like an extremely clear coordinate. In an instant, the distant Beihai was completely boiling. Day and night alternated. When the morning light was about to come, Mount Dibing suddenly sprinkled a piece of extremely bright and cold silver light. In everyone's sight, on the distant boiling sea. The majestic sword energy roared and rushed to the sky. Under the flying snow, above the sea. A huge bright moon slowly rose from the sea. For a moment, it seemed to occupy all the light in the world. Chapter 10:20. The bright moon rose on the sea. The cold and bright light filled the world, quietly and softly sprinkling on Mount Dibing. Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, Moraid, when everyone saw this scene, they were all stunned on the spot. The wind and snow over Beihai were getting wilder. The heavy snow was falling. The night was fading, and the morning light gradually shone. In the most impossible environment and the most impossible time, the moonlight sprinkled all over the earth without warning. Boom! The whole Beihai was turbulent. Huge waves surged, and the sea was turbulent. On the sea far away from Mount Dibing, the sea level within a radius of tens of thousands of meters suddenly began to rotate, and in the fastest time, it became a huge whirlpool. The sky and the sea shook at the same time. The roar echoed between heaven and earth. The loud roar was like the heartbeat of the sky. And the incredibly huge whirlpool on the sea was the breath of the sea. Wang Xingxiao once asked Xian Ming if he had ever seen the breath of the sea. No one had seen it. But at this time, everyone on Mount Dibing saw this scene. Thousands of hectares of seawater roared and rotated and shrank with an earth-shattering noise. Endless light sprayed out from the center of the whirlpool. Cold, calm, indifferent, and calm. The indescribable light constantly intertwined, forming an extremely pure silver plate. It was like a real bright moon, rising above the sea and rushing to the sky. The bright moon rose on the sea. Jiang Shangyu's body gradually became stiff. Li Guangtu was silent. Moraid was a little confused. Standing behind the three of them, Li Tianlan hovered in midair, gazing at the boiling sea in the distance. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a fanatical fighting spirit burned in the depths of his eyes. After watching for a while, he shook his head regretfully. The bright moon on the sea kept rising. It shone on the sea, the earth, and the night sky. The bright moon in the flying snow was round and bright, almost perfect. The sea level shook violently, and the monstrous waves became more and more turbulent. There seemed to be only the earth-shattering tide and the clear light that illuminated the world left in the world. Jiang Shangyu's stiff body trembled. He sucked in a breath of cold air. The bright moon had jumped out of the sea and hung high in the sky. Without any hesitation. All the unwillingness, regret, and anger were completely restrained. He didn't have the time to count his losses. Jiang Shangyu's domain directly covered everyone around him. His voice was urgent and solemn. Go. Yes, let's go. The most direct meaning of this word in this situation was to retreat. All his fighting spirit had completely disappeared. Jiang Shanyu couldn't care about anything else. It was a bright moon that leaped out of the sea. The light that changed heaven and earth. Everything looked so pure. But when he felt it carefully, Jiang Shanyu felt a subtle but ubiquitous sword intent. He no longer thought about the outcome of the decisive battle in the North Sea. There was no time to think. An intense sense of danger rose from his heart the moment the moon appeared, frantically warning him. Jiang Shanyu turned around with no expression on his face. He stepped forward. He lifted his foot and dropped it again. He landed in midair. At this moment, Jiang Shanyu really took a step. It was less than a meter. Jiang Shangyu's face suddenly changed dramatically. Li Guangtu's face also became somewhat gloomy and ugly. If an expert who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm wanted to retreat, he could appear a kilometer away in one step. But now, Jiang Shangyu's step was just one step. The bright moon shone on heaven and earth. Under the clear light, the space between heaven and earth seemed to completely solidify and become extremely solid. Jiang Shangyu's domain was forcibly compressed under the illumination of the clear light. Jiang Shangyu, with a cold face, took another step forward. One step was just one step. The boundless clear light didn't restrict his freedom, but it forcibly suppressed his domain and speed. Your Majesty, how? Moraid finally realized that something was wrong. He subconsciously wanted to ask Jiang Shangyu what to do. But before he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his head. In his sight, the bright moon hanging high in the sky was shining and instantly becoming bigger. The morning light spread, and the bright moon flowed. Endless clear light gushed out unscrupulously in the air. In an instant, a beam of light that penetrated everything appeared in the sky and on the ground. The beam of light fell directly on Mount Dibing. Crack! Jiang Shangyu's domain, which had been compressed to the extreme, was instantly torn apart. The extreme sharpness swept through everything. It was the sword energy, heaven and earth, and the whole world. The whole world seemed to have become an invincible divine weapon at this moment. The domain, which even Li Tianlan could hardly break in a short time, was as fragile as a piece of white paper under the light and was instantly broken. Jiang Guochu, who stood in front of Moraid, did not even scream. The body of the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America was directly cut into a bloody mist. Blood flew everywhere. A large amount of blood burst out from Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Moraid at the same time. On the ground, more than a dozen experts at the peak of the invincible realm were directly smashed into pieces without saying a word. The sky was bloody mist. Moraid's aura directly fell to the bottom. Blood was spurting all over his body, and the sound of bones breaking kept ringing in his body. At the moment when the infinite sharpness was about to penetrate his body completely, Jiang Shangyu, whose face was pale, suddenly stretched out his palm. He clenched his fist. A new domain appeared in front of the three of them in an instant. The moment the domain appeared, it was completely torn apart by the sharpness in heaven and earth. The space in front of Jiang Shangyu was constantly twisting. Another domain was formed, and then it collapsed without any pause. 30-meter mortal world. This was his strongest defensive means now. The domain of less than 15 meters was completely unbreakable. Even he, the person involved, could not cancel the 30-meter mortal world in a short time after using it. During the battle in Tiannan, even Li Tianlan did not have a way to completely break the 30-meter mortal world in a short time. But now, in the spreading clear brilliance, the 30-meter mortal world was broken twice in a row, and it did not even last for a second. Jiang Shangyu's body was shaking wildly. The 30-meter mortal world was thrown out again and again. This was the strongest unique skill that condensed all the strength of his body. Every time it was torn by the clear brilliance, his body seemed to be ravaged by endless sword light. Blood dripped, and his internal injury continued to worsen. It seemed that something had completely broken in the dark. His abundant physical strength began to be consumed at an incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, it reached the bottom. Then it was overdraft at all costs. The 30-meter mortal world kept appearing again and again. Li Guangtu was also doing his best. His hands kept making gestures. His martial arts came from the 24 moves of sword, which mainly focused on swordsmanship. In the Immortality Seal, there was only one move similar to the domain effect, which was called the Cage of Heaven and Earth. However, this move was now completely like a joke in the clear brilliance all over the sky. The 30-meter mortal world and the Cage of Heaven and Earth kept appearing, but they were completely torn in an instant. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and the clear light flowed. Pieces of light continued to fall down, hitting the domains of Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu. The clear light spread, and it seemed that nothing could stop it for a second. Death. This word was so clearly placed in front of Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu. Death was close at hand, and it was impossible to avoid. They did not know what the bright moon in the sky was, but they knew what the clear light they were facing now was. There were thousands of clear lights, and every trace and every wisp was sword energy. The sword energy was extremely pure but exploding to the extreme. This was the real supreme swordsmanship. It was not close to it, but it had really stepped into that level of swordsmanship. Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation. Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation from the Wang family of Beihai. Whether it was Jiang Shangyu or Li Guangtu, there was a clear trace of fear in their eyes at this moment. With such a clear sword chi and such a unique realm, they could only think of one person. Wang Tianzong, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. But how could he recover from his injury? The light was like a tide, surging layer by layer. An equally fierce sharpness burst out behind him in an instant. The world became quiet in an instant. The clear brilliance all over the sky was entangled. Behind Jiang Shangyu, Li Tianlan had already raised his sword edge. The forever silent world. The colorful light rushed into the clear brilliance all over the sky. Countless colors shone at the same time. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world was completely broken. The Cage of Heaven and Earth disappeared in an instant. The power and sword energy that Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu burst out with all their strength were completely melted. The light flew in the flying snow. The forever silent world and the 6 paths of reincarnation merged with each other, and the extreme destructive power completely enveloped Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu. Puff! A large mouthful of blood, along with all the pieces of internal organs, sprayed directly from Li Guangtu's mouth. Ah 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 ah. Jiang Shangyu roared like a beast, and the infinite light completely drowned his body. His bunker suddenly stiffened for a moment. Blood sputtered from all corners of his body. Jiang Shangyu's eyes became fierce and resentful. He seemed to have made up his mind, and his whole body shook fiercely. Boom! A dull clap of thunder suddenly rang out in the silent world. The incomparably firm space was completely shattered by him. A bit of extreme darkness appeared around him and rapidly expanded. In the shortest time, it directly swallowed the clear brilliance and the colorful sword energy all over the sky. Jiang Shangyu's aura continued to decline. When he was about to faint, the bit of darkness around him was completely formed, and the domain expanded for a moment. He grabbed Li Guangtu and more aid, and the 3 figures instantly disappeared in the light and shadows all over the sky. All of this happened in less than a second. Crack! The domain of darkness was broken again. The figures of Jiang Shangyu and the others had disappeared from Mount Dibing. Li Tianlan put away the Shenyuan blade and instinctively turned to chase after them. But as soon as his body moved, he froze on the spot. The cold obscurity that covered Mount Dibing kept surging, and the strong and sharp aura seemed to be quietly aimed at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan slowly turned around and looked at the silver light between heaven and earth, expressionless. The shadows on Mount Dibing disappeared one after another. All the divine weapons began to merge with the Shenyuan blade. The sword formation of the 13-story building reappeared, and the Shenyuan blade turned into a black cloak, completely covering Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan stood where he was without any expression. He put down Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu, and let go of all his thoughts. Now, he just stared at the endless brilliance in front of him and the bright moon hanging in the sky with great concentration. The brilliance that covered Mount Dibing suddenly began to shrink. Li Tianlan was motionless. The brilliance surged around him. The clear brilliance all over the sky kept gathering in the direction of the stage of formidable person. The bright moon was still hanging high. Countless brilliance finally turned into an extremely pure sword energy. The sword energy fell on the stage of formidable person and slowly outlined a somewhat illusory figure. Wang Xingxiao watched this scene quietly. The figure on the stage of formidable person took shape and stood beside Wang Xingxiao. The eyes of the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai instantly turned red. He gritted his teeth, but his voice was still trembling and choking with sobs. Dad, under the stage of formidable person, there were only dozens of reserve members of the All Heavens troop left kneeling on one knee at the same time. Their voices shook the night sky. Your Majesty. The fully formed figure became clearer, more and more stable, and more real. Li Tianlan saw it clearly. At this moment, the figure standing beside Wang Xingxiao was the figure of Wang Tianzong. Li Tianlan was looking at him. He was also looking at Li Tianlan in silence. Sharp brilliance shone in the night sky. The flying snow was drifting, and the gradually brightening night sky was full of fierce killing intent. Slowly, Wang Tianzong's figure raised his palm. Li Tianlan sneered. Ruthlessness, which had almost no energy, fluttered in the wind and snow. Li Tianlan's incomparably cold voice sounded on Mount Dibing. If you want to fight, just do it. If your real body is here, I will turn around and leave. But you? A streak of sword energy, who do you think you are? Wang Tianzong was silent. His figure was clear, but it looked a little stiff. He was Wang Tianzong. But not Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's injury was recovering very slowly, little by little. Tonight, what appeared on the stage of formidable person was a streak of Wang Tianzong's sword energy. Or rather, it was Wang Tianzong's sword energy doppelganger. With Worryless of Beihai as the carrier, he appeared on Mount Dibbing. Li Tianlan thought that the two of them could easily kill Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu by joining hands. But he did not expect that in Wang Tianzong's eyes, he had become the most important threat. Wang Tianzong would rather let Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu go, just to target him. Li Tianlan's eyes became more and more gloomy. From this sword chi doppelganger, it could be seen that Wang Tianzong was in a very bad state at this time. This doppelganger used Worryless as a carrier, but it still seemed extremely stiff. Obviously, Wang Tianzong's consciousness was even a little muddled. Most of the credit should be given to Worryless for his sword chi to be able to exert the power of the Chosen One. In such a state, Wang Tianzong's strength could not be restored. At most, he could barely struggle on the line of life and death. Maybe he could recover. But to recover completely? It was almost equivalent to a fool's talk. After more than 2 years, Li Tianlan finally saw how horrible Mormon's eternal sword was from the side. Wang Tianzong's state at this time was enough to explain everything. Wang Tianzong slowly put down his palm. The bright moonlight in the sky flowed. Silently, Wang Tianzong's figure suddenly turned into the silver brilliance all over the sky. Countless cold rays of light drifted toward the sky, and finally merged with the bright moon in the sky. Li Tianlan squinted, took a deep look at the bright moon in the sky, and turned to look in the direction where Jiang Shangyu left. He took a deep breath, moved his feet slightly, and stopped again. The full moon, which had absorbed the clear brilliance all over the sky, became bright again. Wisps of clear light were silently projected on Mount Dibbing. The light continued to gather and turned into figures one after another. 1, 2, 3, 5, 5 shadows. 5 different directions. They were all Wang Tianzong. 5 Wang Tianzong slowly surrounded Li Tianlan with him as the center. Li Tianlan's eyes seemed to have lost the last bit of warmth. He looked up at the bright moon in the sky and seemed to understand something. Wuyo, Sword Emperor. The two sides had undoubtedly reached an agreement to some extent. Wuyo borrowed Wang Tianzong's sword intent. And Wang Tianzong borrowed Wuyo's energy. However, Wang Tianzong's current state was too poor. He could barely feel everything in the outside world with the projection of sword energy, but his main willpower was Wuyo. So Wuyo didn't care about the lives of Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu at all. It didn't matter if they died. Even if they ran away, it didn't matter. It wanted to keep Li Tianlan here. Only Li Tianlan. In other words, it was Li Tianlan's ruthlessness. One shadow after another was Wang Tianzong's sword energy. So, Li Tianlan looked up at the moon above Mount Dibbing. The one that Beihai had hidden for hundreds of years, Lin Fengting had always wanted to see, but he couldn't. The core of all murderous weapons, Wuyo of Beihai, it was the bright moon in the sky. Li Tianlan smiled. Heartless surged slightly from his body, separated, and fell into his hand. Xianyuan blade began to stretch slowly, no longer in the shape of a sword. A sky halberd that was nearly 3 meters long appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. He held the sky halberd hard in his hand and squinted at the 5 shadows around him. "Come on," he said calmly. Chapter 10:21. Wuyo hung high in the sky, and the clear light had completely shrouded Mount Dibbing. In the hazy and bright light, the 5 shadows around Li Tianlan became clearer and more solid. There was an almost indescribably enormous will in the world. This will occupied the entire world, and it carried with it obvious doubt, fear, and a strong desire. Wuyo was alive. So the moment Li Tianlan approached Mount Dibbing, he felt Wuyo's state at that time. Wuyo's state was no longer at its peak. But its degree of completeness was beyond Wuyo's imagination. Carefree Wuyo. They had different names, but if one traced back to the source, they were originally the same body, or in other words, the same creature, just that they had been split apart. Wuyo was the core, but not the complete core. there was still a part of the core in the Lin clan. Even so, in the face of Wuyo had an innate advantage. Because in Wuyo's will, the so-called Wuyo was its own body. Controlling one's own body was a piece of cake for any creature. Everyone's every move was to control their own body. Of course, no one would think about whether their arms had consciousness when they raised their hands. Since it was the core, it was the only consciousness. But after Wuyo arrived at Mount Dibbing, it really noticed that something was wrong. Wuyo's body was incredibly complete. This feeling was hard to describe. It was as if a person's soul had been separated from their body. After going through all kinds of hardships, the soul finally met the body and couldn't wait to fuse with it, only to find that their body had inexplicably grown 2 arms and some other organs. Although it was still a familiar body, it looked more powerful and domineering. Xianyuan Feng was originally incomparably complete. And in this case, compared with the complete Xianyuan Feng, Wuyo only had one less broken heart, but it had several more murderous weapons of this era. In theory, this was also Wuyo's body, but it had no direct connection with Wuyo. This problem was like whether the current Qin Weibai and the Qin Weibai of the Lin clan, or whether the current Jiang Shangyu and the sleeping Jiang Shangyu were the same person. They could be said to be the same person, but they could also be said to be not the same person. The most direct manifestation was that Worryless wanted to control his own body, but Wu Qing used several murderous weapons of this era to directly form a defense system to prevent Worryless from invading. In that state, Heartless already had the capital to fight against Carefree. If Li Tianlan joined the battle, Worryless did not have the confidence to win. So it directly left Mount Dibbing and entered Beihai. This was the second time Worryless had retreated. The first time was some time ago, after Heartless had fused a few murderous weapons. He directly flew from the Central Plains to the North Sea. Although Li Tianlan was not by Wu Qing's side that night, his aura was almost at its peak. Therefore, Worryless took a step back. Today was the second time. Wu Qing obviously felt something when he approached Mount Dibbing, but he didn't show anything. Compared with Wuyo, who was more active in thinking and more changeable in willpower, Wu Qing was quieter and more loyal. He had been silently guarding Li Tianlan. The 3 sword laws on Mount Dibbing completely changed the battle situation in an instant. All of Wu Qing's energy dropped to the bottom in an instant. Everything was in line with Worryless expectations. So with Wang Tianzong's sword energy, he jumped out of the sea, trying to control everything. As long as he swallowed Heartless, he could break through the special magnetic field confinement on Mount Dibbing. He would rush to the European continent to swallow Worryless immediately. When his body was complete again, he would leave here and get real freedom. Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, Li Tianlan, what did all the grievances in the world have to do with him? All he wanted was freedom. The 5 figures of Wang Tianzong completely stabilized. Worryless seemed to be completely sure of Heartless' state. In an instant, all the fear and uneasiness disappeared completely. Absolute desire occupied everything. The huge willpower swept across the night sky. Under the flying snow, 5 figures rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time. He was not hostile to Li Tianlan, but he was not kind either. From the beginning to the end, he had never taken anyone seriously. What he wanted was only Heartless. Flashing and rushing, the clear brilliance all over the sky surged up and down, and the sword energy that had completely turned into a substance completely enveloped Li Tianlan. Before Li Tianlan's voice died away, 5 Wang Tianzong had appeared in front of Li Tianlan at the same time. Sword of Wang Dao. Sword of Emperor Path. Sword of Deceitful Tao. Sword of Heavenly Law. Sword of Holy Path. 5 listened to the sea. 5 different sword energy broke out in an instant from 5 directions. Li Tianlan suddenly raised the sky halberd in his hand. Violent, ostentatious, powerful. Li Tianlan's body stretched to the extreme in an instant, and the piercingly cold light tore the dawn in an instant. The powerful and crazy sky halberd directly hit the blade of the deceitful Taoist sword, which was the fastest. The long halberd suddenly deviated, and Wang Tianzong's figure was directly driven by the huge force to smash toward his other self. Sword of Wang Dao and deceitful Taoist sword collided with a loud bang. In the boiling sword intent, the crescent blades on both sides of the sky halberd stuck the blade of the sword of holy path. The long halberd rotated. As Li Tianlan moved forward, the long halberd fiercely pulled in his direction. At the moment when it brushed past the sword of holy path, the sky halberd broke out with all its strength and fiercely hit the blade of the sword of heavenly law. Li Tianlan, who had shadows, was hardly afraid of any form of siege. With Ruthless, he could have more than 20 shadows, and these shadows could appear in any corner within 1,000 meters or even thousands of meters. In this state, unless there were tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of troops filling every corner where the shadows could appear and besieging Li Tianlan at all costs, a small-scale siege would not work on Li Tianlan at all. But in the face of Wuyo, Li Tianlan would only be a fool to split up Ruthless. In the case that Ruthless could not face the shadows as a whole, Li Tianlan was also not afraid of small-scale group battles. Sky Halberd. Since ancient times, among all the weapons, the heavenly halberd could be said to be the king of group battles. It was capable of both offense and defense. Regardless of whether it was for offense or defense, in a group battle, the heavenly halberd could be said to be unparalleled. Li Tianlan had been practicing swordsmanship since he was a child. But swordsmanship did not necessarily require the use of a sword. At this time, holding the sky halberd in his hand, he was invincible. His every move was also sharp and fierce to the extreme. Li Tianlan had been practicing martial arts since he was a child. In theory, he was good at all kinds of weapons, including sabers, swords, daggers, spears, sticks, and whips. Basically, he was good at all kinds of cold weapons. But among all the things he was good at, besides the sword, he was best at the sky halberd. Sharp, fierce, domineering, invincible, and invincible. In the frenzied sword intent, the sky halberd tore the sky. It swept, dismantled, lifted, and hooked. This was the most direct collision between sword chi and sword chi. Collision. Without the domain. Compared with Wuyo, Li Tianlan was strong in sword intent. Compared with Li Tianlan, Wuyo, who borrowed Wang Tianzong's sword chi, was strong in sword chi. Sword chi and sword intent offset each other. Sword light shone everywhere on Mount Dibbing, but the most essential battle had become close combat. 1 against 5. 5 Wang Tianzong against 1 Li Tianlan. But just by looking at the situation, this so-called 1 against 5 was more like a complete chaotic battle from start to finish. The sky halberd whistled through the crowd, and the sword energy soared into the sky. With the sky halberd in his hand, Li Tianlan's every move was full of indescribable power and spirit. The crescent blades on both sides of the long halberd were almost used to the extreme. Every time Li Tianlan struck, he could always use the strength of his opponent to attack several other opponents. Mount Dibbing was constantly shaking under the huge power and sword chi. Wuyo obviously noticed something. The 5 figures of Wang Tianzong suddenly blurred and disappeared in an instant. The bright moon hung high in the sky. The morning light of Beihai passed, ushering in the day. But even in the daytime, the bright moon on Mount Dibbing was still shining. The cold light completely integrated with the morning light and became more hidden. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were more and more fanatical, looked up at the bright moon in the sky. The sky halberd disappeared in his hand and became Xianyuan blade again. The light began to gather. In the air, Wang Tianzong's figure became clear again. There was only one. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and sneered, 5 shadows, is your limit? 6 paths of reincarnation of Beihai, 1 shadow is missing. No matter how you perform, there will be flaws. Wang Tianzong, who appeared in the air, was silent. The huge willpower between heaven and earth was also calm. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became cold. You can look at my shadow, he said slowly. 1 shadow after another appeared between heaven and earth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There were 9 in total. Including Li Tianlan, there were 10 Li Tianlans around Wang Tianzong in an instant. Li Tianlan raised the sword edge slightly. The other 9 Li Tianlans raised their palms at the same time. The sword intent was surging, natural and flawless. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes slightly. It was an extremely subtle movement. It was a movement that Wuyo could not do under normal circumstances. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly froze. Wang Tianzong, who was originally lifelike and real, seemed to be different at this moment. The feeling that looked real but in fact always seemed a little stiff and dull completely disappeared. As Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes, his whole person carried a touch of unparalleled danger. That was the supreme majesty. He was no longer Wuyo. Wang Tianzong. This was the real Wang Tianzong. He, who was in a daze, suddenly seemed to have a brief moment of sobriety. He still did not speak or even hesitated. The moment his eyes locked on Li Tianlan, Wang Tianzong directly raised his palm. Boom! In an instant, heaven and earth were completely chaotic. The roar was like thunder. The space of tens of thousands of meters around Mount Dibing was directly torn apart. The chaotic airflow of light turned into wisps of clear and agile sword energy. The majestic sword energy absorbed every ray of light around, integrated with the clear brilliance all over the sky, and integrated with the vigorous morning sun. The world in sight was completely occupied by the sword light and sword energy in an instant. Wang Tianzong's outstretched palm stiffened in the air for a moment. His movement was very slow, but it was extremely determined to press down on Li Tianlan slowly. Li Tianlan's pupils completely contracted to the extreme. He was completely sure of the other party's identity. This was definitely not Wuyo. Wuyo borrowed Wang Tianzong's sword energy. The relationship between the two was already close to integration. So when Wang Tianzong temporarily sobered up, the primary and secondary relationship was instantly reversed. At this moment, Wang Tianzong was using his sword energy to borrow Wuyo's energy. Supreme and supreme. Even if he was seriously injured, even if he was in a daze, even if Wuyo was not complete. But this strike was still the supreme sword strike of the Chosen One. 6 Paths of Reincarnation Sword. It was the almost perfect 6 Paths of Reincarnation Sword. The sword light was endless, occupying everything and rushing to Li Tianlan at the same time. The sky and the sea seemed to fall and rise at the same time, squeezing and destroying everything. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and the 9 shadows became extremely real in an instant. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly began to become illusory. Just now, there were 9 shadows of him. But now it seemed that there were 9 shadows of Li Tianlan. Xianyuan Feng vibrated wildly in his hand at an unprecedented frequency. Facing the tide of sword energy that seemed to be able to destroy the whole world, Li Tianlan held the sword with both hands and suddenly raised Xianyuan Feng in his hand. Heaven and earth exploded. Li Tianlan and the 9 shadows took action at the same time. Chopping forward. Li Tianlan's aura fluctuated greatly. The moment he fell from the chi-controlling realm, he directly rushed to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and then suddenly entered the half-step invincible realm. The colorful sword light flashed wildly in the transparent light all over the sky, flashing thousands of times in an instant. This time, it was not thunder, but sword energy. The sword energy was pure and perfect to the extreme. The bright day turned into night in an instant. The bright moon hung high in the sky. Wuyo became more and more dazzling and cold in the darkness. The wildly twisted and vibrating sword energy suddenly collided with the constantly flying sword light. Mount Dibing completely disappeared in an instant. The palace, the jungle, the flowers, the highway, everything was completely shattered by the collision of the sword light. The huge Mount Dibing was razed to the ground in an instant. The sword light that occupied the sky kept colliding and tearing everything apart. Light and darkness intertwined, and nothingness and reality changed. The figures of Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong appeared and disappeared in the constantly flashing light. The world seemed to become a staggered picture. Every time Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong disappeared and reappeared, they did different movements and positions. The sword light collided wildly, and the figures of the two seemed to be completely imprinted in heaven and earth at this moment. Mount Dibbing completely became the past. The thousands of sword chi clashing noiselessly came to an abrupt halt. Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong still stood where they were. Boom! The endless waves completely rushed up to the sky, and the sky was turbulent. The moment when countless sword energy disappeared, an earth-shattering sound suddenly rang between heaven and earth. Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Tianlan. His figure instantly dissipated and collapsed. Puff! A large mouthful of blood and pieces of internal organs directly spurted out of Li Tianlan's mouth. The endless white mist slowly spread. It completely wrapped his body in it. High up in the sky, the bright moon was still shining, and the endless light once again surged toward Li Tianlan. Young master. In the helicopter, Xing Tian, who saw this scene, suddenly stood up and said, "I'll go." He had watched the earth-shattering exchange from the beginning to the end. It was almost a battle between the Chosen One and the Chosen One. Both of them had flaws. But for this era, whether it was Li Tianlan or Wang Tianzong, any one of them could be said to be supreme. The clear light flowed. Obviously, Guo didn't intend to give up. Xing Tian, who was watching this scene silently, finally opened his mouth and volunteered. Saint, who was extremely nervous, subconsciously glanced at Xing Tian, and he was a little confused. "You're going?" He thought silently, "You're in East Island now, nearly 1,000 kilometers away. When you get to Beihai, it will be too late. What are you going to do?" Xianyuan Wushang looked at the screen quietly and said without looking back. "I don't think we can waste too much time. I'll destroy Wuyo and let His Majesty deal with the energy core." Xing Tian said nonchalantly. "And then?" Xianyuan Wushang scolded with a smile, "And then you think you can go home after you finish the task? Put away your little thoughts. Wuyo will be my brother sooner or later, but this is his own path. Why do you have to interfere? If my father finds out, he'll tear you apart." The corner of Xing Tian's mouth twitched, and he said quietly, "His Majesty is in danger." Xianyuan Wushang also fell silent. At that moment, Wang Tianzong had a brief moment of consciousness, so the figure at that moment was completely Wang Tianzong's sword chi doppelganger, but he used Wuyo's energy. Just like the sword chi doppelganger Li Tianlan created with Wuqing, in essence, at least there was no difference in consciousness between Wang Tianzong and the real Wang Tianzong at that moment. So the sword strike just now was the 6 paths of reincarnation sword that truly belonged to the Chosen One. And Li Tianlan also overdrew his body in an instant. His limit was originally the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. But at that moment, he directly fixed his power at the half-step invincible realm and twisted the power of the half-step invincible realm thousands of times in the sword strike. This level of attack, just one sword strike, almost made Li Tianlan's body completely collapse. Even with the endless vitality of the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state, Li Tianlan now suffered unimaginable injuries. And Wuyo's energy was still not exhausted. Everything seemed to be at the end of the road. But, let Xing Tian go. For Xing Tian, even if he could rush over a distance of nearly 1,000 kilometers, he had to go back if he didn't want to die after this attack. He and Saint didn't lie. They did have great advantages in some aspects, but they also had great limitations. Killing an ordinary invincible realm expert was a piece of cake for Xing Tian, but if he appeared next to Li Tianlan at this time, whether he wanted to destroy Wuyo or go to Beihai, it was almost beyond Xing Tian's limit. After that, he wouldn't be able to attack again in the future, and he wouldn't even be qualified to stay here. This was not his original intention, nor was it his father's original intention. Xing Tian might not know why, but Xianyuan Wushang could be sure that if he stayed here, it would be of great benefit to him. Wuyo, Xianyuan Wushang quietly looked at the bright moon through the screen. His eyes flickered slightly, and he whispered to himself, "Look at its current state, it's obviously polluted." Polluted? Wuyo? What state? Saint subconsciously scratched his head. In short, this is not the normal state of Wuyo. Well, we can put it in another way. In this state, Wuyo's psychology is distorted to a certain extent. Ruthlessness is the normal state. Loyalty, reliability, firmness, silence, iron blood. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. What a pity. Saint quietly looked at Xianyuan Wushang. His voice was extremely calm. What about your majesty? He didn't care about Wuyo, nor did he care about the so-called pollution. Everything he saw in Mount Dibbing tonight was something he had never seen before. What he cared about most was Li Tianlan's safety. Wang Tianzong directly injured Li Tianlan as soon as he made a move, and Wuyo's energy was still abundant. In such a state, how could Li Tianlan retreat unscathed? Retreat? Li Guangtu's heart moved slightly. The main reason for everything tonight was the final battle in Beihai. Now, the joint forces suffered heavy losses. The two grandmasters of East Island, Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurumi, both died in Mount Dibbing. Moraid was seriously injured and dying. Jiang Guochu, the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, also died. More than a dozen top experts of the half-step invincible realm in the joint forces died without a whole body. Wang Xiaoyao was seriously injured and withdrew from the battlefield. Next was the time for the Wang family of Beihai to counterattack. They had the strength to recapture Kanglan in the shortest time and completely drive all the forces of the joint forces out of Beihai. Everything tonight did make the Wang family of Beihai suffer heavy losses. But with the retreat of Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu, the final battle in Beihai should have been over, or even won. There was no need for Li Tianlan to stay in Beihai. Next, as long as he returned to Tiannan, there would be countless benefits waiting for Emperor Dong's palace in Zhongzhou State. Even in Tiannan, there would be countless benefits waiting for Emperor Dong's palace to reap. So, take a step back temporarily. Although Li Tianlan was seriously injured, his ruthless power was not completely exhausted. Li Tianlan was not really at the end of the road. At least, if he wanted to retreat now, Li Tianlan should be able to do it. In that case, why not retreat? Does His Majesty have a backup plan? I mean, other preparations? Saint lowered his voice and said subconsciously. I don't know. Xianyuan Wushang slowly shook his head. But given his current state, even if Big Brother has a follow-up plan, I'm sure he'll have to pay a heavy price. In fact, given his current state, the price is already very heavy. Even if he has a backup plan, I think he's still hesitating. What about now? Saint's face changed slightly. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. It's okay. Xing Tian glanced at Xianyuan Wushang with some excitement, thinking that Xianyuan Wushang wanted him to take action. Young master. Go away. Xianyuan Wushang glared at Xing Tian angrily. He looked at the screen and said slowly, now Wuyo borrowed Wang Tianzong's sword intent. Without Wang Tianzong, things would be easy for Wuyo alone. So, Wang Tianzong is the key. After a pause, the fat man adjusted his glasses and said softly, Heavenly Son. I'll go talk to him. Chapter 1022. Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang quietly and gradually frowned. How to talk? After a short silence, he asked directly without any politeness. Xianyuan Wushang said that he could talk to Qin Weibai, who was on the verge of death, and now he wanted to talk to Wang Tianzong. No matter who he chose to talk to, it would be an incredible thing in the eyes of others. How could he talk to a man who had almost lost his consciousness? No one in the world could be sure of Wang Tianzong's specific state, but the damage caused by the eternal sword might not be less than that of Qin Weibai. If Wang Tianzong could be talked to now, Saint would not believe it. The most important thing was, even if Wang Tianzong could be talked to, where could Xianyuan Wushang go to talk to him? Find him, and we can talk. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. On the screen in front of him, the picture was similar to a static state. Li Tianlan knelt on one knee in the air, and the blood flowing from his body was the only moving picture. The sun rose little by little on the sea, and the bright moon was still hanging in the sky. The sun and the moon were in the same sky. Wuyo's energy fluctuations became more and more obvious, and the clear light rose and fell between heaven and earth. It seemed to be thinking, and also seemed to be preparing for the strongest blow. The picture was deadlocked and sensitive. Maybe in the next second, or the next second, the stalemate in front of them would be completely broken. Judging from the sword just now, Wang Tianzong's sword Qi doppelganger had consciousness for a short time, so it could have the almost perfect 6 paths of reincarnation sword. Xianyuan Wushang said softly, of course, it may also be Wuyo's stimulation that made Wang Tianzong have consciousness for a short time, but the time for his consciousness to recover was too short, and he didn't even know what was going on. After the sword, his consciousness fell silent again. Big Brother was seriously injured, which led to the current situation. But anyway, at least we can be sure that even if his consciousness can't be awakened, it is still in an active state now, so? Saint could hardly hide the impatience on his face. Xianyuan Wushang was so mysterious that he could understand what he said, but he didn't know what he meant at all. So, Xianyuan Wushang pushed up his glasses. The lights in the cabin shone on his lenses, and countless numbers instantly appeared on his lenses. Streams of data surged crazily. Xianyuan Wushang's voice. Xianyuan Wushang's voice rang. Just find him. The majestic data flowed directly into Beihai along East Island. Surveillance, weapon systems, satellites, and every computer and phone in the thousands of households in the North Sea. The unbridled data was practically a blatant intrusion, but the entire North Sea's network security did not trigger any alarms. One secret base after another of the Wang family of Beihai appeared in Xianyuan Wushang's vision in an instant. Within a few seconds, countless data had completely locked onto the Beihai prison hidden under the surface of Beihai. The control authority changed instantly. The largest cell in the Beihai prison had been completely emptied and transformed. More than a dozen doctors in white coats were busy, and the shrill alarm kept ringing. At this moment, the whole cell had been transformed into the most advanced medical room, and all the equipment in the Beihai biological laboratory was operating here. Wang Tianzong was lying in the nutrition chamber in the center of the medical room. Countless nutrient solutions were boiling in the nutrition tank, and the pale white, foam-like nutrient solutions were decreasing almost at a speed visible to the naked eye. On countless screens, Wang Tianzong's body data was constantly changing. The top medical team in the medical room was all alarmed, but no one knew what was going on. Doctor, His Majesty's brain wave broke through the peak just now, and was even close to the point where he could wake up completely. But this time is very short, exactly 0.3 seconds. During this time, the brain wave reached a new peak, and then His Majesty's brain wave fell into a trough, about 1/3 lower than usual. A young man in a white coat reported Wang Tianzong's situation with a blank look. A young man in a white coat reported Wang Tianzong's situation with a blank look. He wanted to say something subconsciously, but another voice sounded directly beside him. His Majesty's heart rate suddenly accelerated just now. In fact, during this period of time, His Majesty's various physical indicators have been recovering faster. We can be sure that the effect of the body of the god of war has begun to work. Obviously, something happened just now. His Majesty seems to have been stimulated by some special thing. I even have reason to believe that His Majesty was awake for 0.3 seconds just now, but soon fell into a deep coma. The doctor with the gold-rimmed glasses listened silently. After a long time, he slowly said, "Copy His Majesty's body data and send it to Dr. Naylan." In addition, he glanced at the nutrition cabin and continued to say, "Add the latest type of nutrient solution. Everyone will work overtime today and keep an eye on His Majesty's situation." Everything was displayed on the lenses. In the cabin of the helicopter, Xianyuan Wushang suddenly smiled and whispered, "I don't know if this counts as returning a favor to them." "What do you mean?" Saint asked subconsciously. Xianyuan Wushang did not answer. The lenses in front of him suddenly flashed, and a flash of colorful data flowed quickly. At the same time, in the medical room of Beihai Prison, the big screen in the center suddenly flashed. Countless dense data were constantly combined on the screen. Fast. In less than 0.1 seconds, all the data suddenly combined into a figure. Xianyuan Wushang directly walked out of the screen. Everyone present turned a blind eye to his existence. This was not martial arts. To some extent, it was more like a virtual data clone of technological means. Xianyuan Wushang slowly walked to the nutrition cabin. He quietly looked at Wang Tianzong in the nutrition cabin and kept silent for a long time. "Your family," he suddenly murmured to himself and shook his head. He seemed to recall some unpleasant memories. "Master," the virtual clone quickly faded and went into the nutrition cabin. The next moment, Xianyuan Wushang's sight completely fell into darkness. Darkness and light flashed instantly. In the cabin, Xianyuan Wushang narrowed his eyes. There seemed to be two perspectives in front of him. One was Saint, who was frowning tightly in front of him. From another perspective, it was a constantly changing darkness. The virtual clone composed of countless data walked quietly in the darkness. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Saint and slowly explained, "Now Wuyo and Wang Tianzong are in the state of fusion. I don't know if my brother has any backup plan. The most direct way I can think of is to stop Wuyo. I don't have a good way to destroy Wuyo without paying a price, so the only way is to let Wang Tianzong suppress Wuyo." After a pause, he continued, "I'm a doctor, so I will completely stimulate Wang Tianzong's consciousness and speed up his recovery. When he recovers to the point where he can suppress Wuyo, the matter on Mount Dibing will naturally be solved." Saint's eyes suddenly became cold. "You mean you're treating Wang Tianzong?" Xianyuan Wushang looked calm and nodded. "Yes. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.